some water, but still I have to be alert. All these people, I can't believe they're all here. And I'm shouting so you can hear, but I can't believe that everybody that wanted to come came. It's amazing. I'm surprised, isn't it? Even people coming from a long way away, my neighbors, my son come from Melbourne, people from my brother from Argentina. There he is, look.
I haven't seen your brother from Argentina yet.
Yes, well, you
Is he around?
Yes, he's around, of course. He's a flying high. Fantastic. I'm going to embrace more people, including you. Ah!
Hang on.
Thank you on behalf of our family for being here this evening. And I know that some of you have been making a very long trip to get here. We are deeply saddened that our dear friend, Peter Steele, who would have wanted to be here with us with Villa, passed away 2 days ago. This is the beginning of a three-part event to celebrate and to share our diverse experiences with Marcello in his explorations across 3 continents. And the music that you've been heard and you will hear on the background and in other forms epitomizes the diversity of the experiences that we are going to have tonight. The music is a compilation of arrangements which have been written and performed by Ronnie Tahini, Ian Gibbins, Andrea, and Marcello Costa. Ian Gibbins and Judy Morris, they are both scientists from Melbourne, and they came to Adelaide in the early 80s. They are the real inspirer of these events, and I thank them for doing this, and I've been very fortunate to be able to join them in the development of the program of these 2 days. The first evening, involves sharing experiences of our entire family and friends, and Marcello and I are very pleased to have you as our host tonight. In the course of the evening, we will hear about the beginning of our lives in Australia in the early 70s and about more recent events. There will be more insight into Marcello's early life from Giorgio, his brother, who came all the way from Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, to be here with us tonight. It's him, but you will see him later. And Andrea, our son, will also depict some aspects of our life from his unique perspective. Music, foods and drink will flow to mellow us into the evening, and then Marcello will respond. But before I introduce Ian Gibbins, there are a few housekeeping things, announcements that I want to make sure that the evening runs smooth. You would have seen that drinks and food are starting to be served, and the drinks will be served until 10:30. There is a variety of choices of drinks as indicated on the menu on the table. If there are other choices that you may want to make, the bar is open and they are available there. We have a very dense and exciting program, and as a master of ceremony, first time, I have the pleasure and the challenge to introduce every speaker and make sure that everybody keeps on time. That's it. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ian Gibbins. Ian is very well known to most of you, and he's a colleague of Marcello. He arrived in Adelaide from Melbourne with Judy Morris in the 80s, from Melbourne, where he did his PhD with Graham Campbell, and we'll hear a lot about Friend and about Graham and from him shortly. Ian became a professor of anatomy at Flinders and is one of the closest friends and colleagues of Marcello. His passion for adventure, for arts and science makes him the natural choice to open this evening. He will play some of his compositions, which encapsulates Marcello's early music recording and also some songs from South America. Ian Gibbins.
Thanks, Daniela, and thank you everybody for coming along and turning up tonight, because it's really fantastic to see everybody here. And Daniela mentioned people doing the work. Judy's done all the work. That's important to know. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is really scary for me, and maybe bad for you, but who knows. And Marcello and I have been, amongst all the stuff we talk about, science and windsurfing and eating and all sorts of other sorts of things, we have an interest in music, and I've always played a bit. I'm self-taught, and one of the breakthrough things is Marcello went away for a conference or leave or something somewhere, and lent me his 4-track cassette recorder. I thought, well, this is a pretty nifty bit of technology, and I could start multi-tracking and seeing what I really sounded like, which is pretty bad. So it's nothing like hearing yourself over and over and over again in 4 tracks to realise that you can actually probably do something a bit better. So that's quite a while ago, and since then I've sort of been swapping music with Marcello a lot over the years. But it's really only this year I sort of got this idea, well, Marcello actually knows all this fantastic South American music, and we're going to hear from him later tonight, and there'll be some more tomorrow. And I don't actually know that music at all, and I thought, well, one of the things I might be able to do is get some samples of Marcello's music and then do what I normally do with bits and pieces of sound and run them through my computers and keyboards and stuff like that and see what happens. So that's what's going to happen. Now, so what I'll do, I won't talk about them because there's no need to, but there's 2 pieces we'll do tonight. And to start off with, we'll just hear a little sample of Marcello singing by himself, unaccompanied, recorded in his room somewhere at home, and then it'll just sort of fade out, and then there'll be my take on it, and hopefully I won't muck it up, because I actually haven't practiced this very much at all. Well, I hardly ever play in public, and I'm not very good anyway when I have to actually do it as opposed to record it. So here goes. So there's 2 pieces. The first one is called Rosa Merino, and you'll hear Marcello's version, the original song, and then how I turned it into something completely different, but hopefully it gets the feel of it. And the second one is based on a piece Marcello called Impromptu, an improvisation, a guitar solo. And you'll hear a bit of Marcello playing first, and then you'll hear him playing again in a slightly different way, and then hopefully I won't muck it up on the way through. So it's just two short, relatively short pieces. Hopefully the technology will work as well.
It's my pleasure to introduce Graham Campbell. Graham is Emeritus Professor of Zoology from Melbourne. He was witness to our initial years in Melbourne in the early 70s, and he has remained a very good friend and colleague of Marcello for the past years. You will soon discover that behind Graham's unpretentious and light-hearted facade, he hides a very sharp mind, and I'm going to start trembling in the expectation of the word that are going to spring to his mind. So, mouth and mind. Graham Campbell, what is it?
Ladies and gentlemen, what an impossible task to follow the Gibbins remix of Costa. It's insane. I've got to hit the little red knob and make that go away. And then we've got this one, which we'll do in a moment. So I'm going to say to all of you, firstly, this is something I haven't practiced. I arrived, I looked at the guest list, I have a 2.5-year-old son. Guess who I'm going to tell my son I had dinner with tonight? Tommaso Coniglio. There we go. Thomas Rabbit. Correct? Have I translated correctly? Thomas Rabbit. My son is going to be so pleased he knows somebody who had dinner with Thomas Rabbit. This has made my night. Now, yes, I think we'll say thank you very much, Tommaso. The second thing is, in Australia it's well known that there are two main ages, BC and AD. Before Costa, after Daniela, right? So I'm going to talk about, I was present at that transition from where we went from nothing, from BC to AD, and I felt that I had to talk a little about Marcello in the old days, about which fortunately I knew nothing. So I thought I'd go searching on the web for images. And I searched for Marcello, Daniela, I found absolutely nothing. And then Susan said to me, why don't you take the pornography filter off? And that's worked very well, and that's what tonight's talk is based on. So here we go, and with luck something will load, and then I'll be able to hit something that plays a... There we go. So this is our subject, Marcello Costa from earliest days to around 1975, presented by me. Here are the things you know: doctor, neuroscientist, philosopher. You probably don't know much about the gaucho, the daredevil, the musician we've had a bit, the neologist. Now, I don't have time to go into this topic of Marcello the neologist, but I'm told he has a mine gold of examples of new vocals. Marcello is the subject of a recent biography. Here it is. And I was very pleased to find that this book of Marcello's life is hopeful news for those suffering from functional bowel disease. So Marcello, you're right up there. He was born in Turin a long time ago, the son of a poor but honest Italian family. During the war they were assisted in Italy by Uncle Benny. And then after the war, they were fortunate to move to Argentina, where Uncle Juan and Auntie Aviva, the little girl Evita, were able to help them to settle. They had many choices in the Argentine. They could stay in the city, Buenos Aires, as you did, I believe, but you could, of course, move up country. So the Costas moved up country to the Pampas, and Marcello spent his formative years living the life of the gaucho. The whole family, in fact, were absorbed into the gaucho culture, as I'll try to demonstrate to you. Marcello learned to prepare the asado, a simple meal, consisting of several cows split in half, roasted on an open fire. In fact, one of the first things he did for us in Melbourne is he launched us into the asado culture. He took, as I remember, 2 sheep, split them in half, impaled them on stakes, built an enormous bonfire, and then we had the interesting experience. This happened in country Victoria. It turns out that the fire is raging hot and the sheep were cooking, and there was a zone you might call the zone of death, which extended out to about here. Right, there's the fire, and we have the zone of death. Only Marcello could enter the zone of death, and he did so with buckets of herbs and oils, right, and would throw them on these sheep. About 2 feet outside the zone of death was the zone of Australian bushflies. They could smell what was going to come, but they didn't dare go into the zone of death. So Marcello would then dash in, cut off some beautiful tasting meat, give it to us, and it would instantly be covered with bushflies. And he'd be going, "Lovely food, Marcello." I think in the Argentine they don't have so many flies. He spent many evenings with the gauchos as they plucked their instruments, as you know. He often practices alone in his laboratory, and we've heard some of this music. But he spent a lot of time in the saddle as he was a gaucho, and he developed novel ways to dismount. This one I particularly like, managing to get not only off the horse, but upside down in between the front feet. I think that's excellent. Yet there was a darker side to Marcello's love of horses. The family decided they had to get him out of the Argentine and back to Italy quickly, where he should do a medical degree to get this nonsense about horses out of his system. Marcello's father, unfortunately, decided to stay in Argentina. And frankly, if I'd known he had a brother who had stayed in Argentina, I would have used the brother's name. He graduated in medicine at the University of Turin. He graduated laurea in medicina to chirurgia, MBBS with a lot more BS. And this, believe it or not, is the medical school graduating class of 1967. It's a bit hard to tell, but Marcello is there. For Australians who are not used to the formality of European nations, this is just an example. From 1967 to 70, he lectured at the University of Turin, where he worked with Giorgio Gabella under the leadership of Professor Guido Filogamo, and he often praised Professor Filogamo, who was so inspirational that Marcello decided to leave. Right? And I've probably said something terrible at this moment, but too bloody bad. Through a misunderstanding, he became a postdoctoral fellow with Jeff Bernstock. So I'll have to tell you a bit about the misunderstanding. This is Jeff Bernstock around 1972, a little after Marcello arrived. So Jeff wasn't yet showing the grey hair that Marcello brought with him. In '69, Jeff was experimenting with postdocs of various nationalities, right? And he decided that this was the critical moment to try one of Italian background. So he wrote to Professor Filogamo asking for an electron microscopist, because he'd heard about how good Giorgio Gabella was. And he just wanted to get Giorgio Gabella to come out to Melbourne. Jeff's secretary, this lovely lady, Marion Rubio, and in a spirit of fun, she left out the word electron from the letter. So that instead of sending for an electron microscopist, Bernstock sent for any old microscopist. And that's what we got, Marcello Costa. Now, this was a department of zoology, and Marion was in fact famous for this mistake and for a later mistake. This one is worth thinking about. We were looking for a lecturer in marine science, right? And she changed it to a lecturer in murine science, and we learned a lot about mice that we never wanted to hear about. So here's Marcello at work, his first job in Melbourne. Jeff was so excited by this. So this is Jeff Bernstock, his wife on this side, and a friend, I'm not sure the name of the friend, taken with Marcello's stories of the gaucho life and deciding to emulate some of it. Marcello brought out his new wife, Daniela, with him. Now, there's a little problem here. I said to Daniela, I've looked through my files, I found very few pictures of you or Marcello, so please send me some pictures, and I don't mind if the pictures of you are the ones in bikinis, I can use them. And she sent me this. He's testing his invention of the two-man slingshot. Uh-oh, I'm sorry, I've dropped one. I will go back to that one. I might need a Morris to help me. Oh, come on, you're spoiling my whole story. Judith, could you come help me? Why can't I get out of this?
You're squinting. You just
I just want to go back to... Sorry about this. You must recognise that I predate all this bullshit stuff. Here we go. Thank you very much, Judith. Now, so this is the two-man slingshot, and please notice that Daniela, this in fact was the only photograph Daniela sent me of her. She is wearing a bikini. Unfortunately, Marcello has decided to dress her in a coat made of horse cloth, right, a horse blanket, and this represents his earlier love with the life pack on the Pampas, I think. Here we go, here it is, right. He was very impressed with the high standards of dress in Melbourne. That was John Furness, as he wore in the laboratory every day at that time. And then he was even more impressed by the incredible intelligence, the driving energy, and that, believe it or not, is me. And that's me trying to look intelligent. In fact, I remember that Marcello had to work with me for his first few weeks in the department, and I was trying to do some pharmacology on the gut of a lamprey. And Marcello kept saying to me things like, "Que cosa? What's going on?" And I'd say, "I don't know. I still don't understand anything I saw in those experiments. It turns out the gut of the lamprey doesn't do pharmacology, it does something else." It was a very illuminating experience, and he stopped doing pharmacology as a result of that. What have we got now? Marcello was in fact my personal tutor in the town, and he heard that I was going to work in Naples. He decided he would help me with a few things. So I asked him, I said, "Here are some of the things I wanted to say. Right, we'll try the first one. Where's the toilet?" That's an easy one. Fortunately, I tried this one on Marcello's mother. He suggested, "Dove il cesso?" I tried it on Marcello's mother. She screamed, fainted. Then when she came to, she said, "Where did you learn that from?" I said, "Marcello," and she went and hit Marcello, because it means, roughly, "Where's the shitter?" Then there's this interesting one. Because I was going to Naples, I thought, friendly town, place to say, "G'day, mates." I'm not sure if I spelt this right, but it sounded right. Vaffanculo. G'day, mates in Italian, you see. So when I arrived in Naples, crowds of young men would wolf whistle me because I was wearing long hair. And I would say, "Vaffanculo." And they would chase me because they'd blow it out your eyes. And I found myself in several dilemmas, but fortunately Marcello had shown me how to attract the attention of the police. What you do is you run from the mob until you see a policeman, then looking the policeman in the eye, you say... Then the policeman came and took you safely to the cells for the rest of the night. I'm trying to be very serious now. There were two important things that Marcello got out of his time in Melbourne. The first one is meeting with John Furness. And there they are, both as young men. And that relationship between Marcello and John went, like any good marriages, it had its ups and downs, but it was very productive. And he developed the pastinergic theory. At that time, everybody was excited about what chemicals nerves released and how they affected things. And we had the cholinergic theory, the adrenergic theory, the vipergic theory. Marcello had the pastinergic theory, and he actually gave a talk about this in the Department of Zoology, and I swear I saw Jeff Bernstock taking notes for about 5 minutes before he actually threw his pencil on the floor. But there you go. I'm not going to go into it too much, except that Marcello's experience with multicoloured pasta, I believe, is what led him to think that he could probably colour every single neuron in the gut a completely different colour. The next time you see pictures of multicoloured neurons in the gut, think Marcello and the pastinergic theory. He's still a daredevil. He still follows his interest in climbing. In Australia, this is hard to do. That's one of the best ones of the lot. And of course, he's an ardent windsurfer. So here he is on the local Padawalonga. And I'm going to end the formal part of this talk by saying, Marcello, it's been a pleasure to know you all of these years. I can still remember when you blew in to the university and we wondered, what the hell have we got here? It turns out what we had was a gem. Thank you very much for coming to Australia. Thank you.
Barbary Clark is one of the first persons outside science that Marcello met when he arrived in 1970, and since then Barbary has been a great friend of the family. Barbary is very committed to a better social acceptance of diversity, and you'll see that behind her charming mind is a most articulate personality and spirit. Barbary Clark.
I distinctly remember first meeting Marcello in the left-hand side of the foyer in the zoology department building at Melbourne Uni. Jeff Bernstock introduced me to him because he knew that I'd studied some Italian and thought it would be good if we got together and had a yak. I'd like to point out that Marcello did not come to... Daniela did not come to Australia with Marcello. There was a two-month difference. And so I felt the need to try and make him a little less homesick than he was without his bride of 1 month who was back in Italy finishing her medical degree. So here is Marcello in Australia, footloose but not entirely fancy-free. So what do we do to make him feel less homesick? Take him skiing, of course. So me and a group of people, including Marcello, went up to Falls Creek. And of course, Falls lived up to its name, and one of my friends fell down and injured herself for her first time on the slopes ever. So Dr. Marcello had a look at her leg or ankle, and we decided that we had to take her to hospital. So there I was in the back of the car trying to keep Charles comfortable, and Marcello drove. And of course, weaving down the mountain, round hairpin bends with steep slopes on either side, we saw a bus approaching from several bends away. And when it got closer, knowing that there was hardly room for a bus and a car to pass each other on the road, Marcello pulled over to the side of the road to let the bus pass. The bus came round the corner, and the driver got a bit of a surprise because Marcello had pulled over to the Italian side of the road. So there we were at a bit of a Mexican standoff. But anyway, that was all sorted out, and we had some really good times around the fireside with Marcello playing the guitar. He played variations on Recuerdos de la Alhambra with some pretty nifty fingerwork. And he taught me a song from Orfeonero, a really poignant song about how sadness is never ending, but happiness is like a feather floating on the breeze, and when the wind stops, it falls to the ground. Because I didn't want to be bothered with cooking while I was up at Falls, I brought a big lasagna that I could just heat up. When I told Marcello that I had cooked lasagna, he said, It's going to have to be a really good one for me to eat it. And I take it as a great personal compliment that he came back for a second course, second helping. Dessert, however, was another matter, because pretty well every dessert I know involves fruit. And I'm sure that a lot of you will know Marcello's rather interesting attitude towards fruit. So I was studying at Melbourne University, and occasionally I'd drop in at the zoology department and I'd see Marcello crouched over a microscope in a darkened room. He was pulling rats' muscles, which were already rather narrow, into much thinner, smaller strips, and then, if I remember rightly, subjecting them to electrical stimulation. Being a non-scientist, this seemed pretty weird and arcane to me, but as you can see from today, that activity formed the basis for a very successful Australian career. Now, sometimes I'd ask Marcello and Daniela up to our place at Mount Macedon. We had a big rambling weatherboard house there with a big garden and a pond down the bottom, and a rather famous Tarzan swing with a holly tree at the end of the long arc for the unwary. Yes. So I remember one visit particularly when I went to go to bed at night and I couldn't get into my bed because Marcello had apple pied it. I said nothing, and being a good hostess, in the morning I cooked up the coffee in that little wasted coffee cooker that some Italians prefer, and I took Marcello some coffee in bed, and I stayed there and talked while he was drinking it. And part of the way through, his face became a little bit puzzled. Maybe it was because of the centimetre of white pepper I'd put in the bottom of the cup. Then there were the parties at a student share house in Ascot Vale. One memorable evening we had Chris Kimber, who was the concert violinist there. I asked him to play for us and I requested Hungarian gypsy music. We'd all had a meal, but we hadn't had time to wash up yet. And Chris decided that the acoustics were the best in the kitchen, so here we had this famous musician playing in a kitchen full of dirty dishes. Then John Furness, followed by Marcello, went over to Adelaide, to Flinders, and I missed dropping in to zoology. And every time I went over to Adelaide, I was beseeched to bring grana padano cheese from the Lygon Street cheese shop and Grinders coffee from that most iconic of establishments. Mind you, Marcello had once taken me for a cup of coffee at Grinders, and to me it tasted a bit like liquid quinine. But I do understand the addictions to familiar foods. So by now Andrea had come along, and soon my car could almost navigate itself to Shepherd's Hill Road, Eden Hills. One time I accompanied Marcello and Daniela to a tennis party. I hadn't seen John Furness for a few years, so I called out across the room, "G'day John, how are you going?" I clearly remember the shock Marcello expressed after we left, that I hadn't gone across the room and given John a big hug. And here I have to acknowledge Marcello's role as a teacher in my life. Marcello, thank you for helping me to get out the stick that had been placed down my back by my reserved Anglo upbringing. I now claim to give some of the best hugs I know. One time we all went to the beach at Seacliff, and as my family had done when we went to the beach, I put dobs of sunburn cream on Andrea's face as if it was Red Indian war paint. And this was a really big success all round. It was lovely meeting Giorgio and Juliana and Guy when they came over to Australia, And I took great pleasure in showing them the cross up on top of Mount Macedon and Hanging Rock and our garden, as I had Marcello years before. And they were there when there was a fire coming down over the top of Mount Macedon. And we had to make some preparations for it. And this is another instance where Marcello marvelled at our cultural differences. I was organising people to fill up the gutters with water. Put the tennis ball at the end and fill it up with water. And Giorgio was busy packing up some of our treasures into suitcases to be taken down to Melbourne. And later, Marcello said he really admired the calmness and coolness with which I had handled the situation. So maybe the Anglo upbringing was good for something after all. Then I travelled to Europe and was unexpectedly at a loose end for Christmas one year. So I had the joy of meeting Augusto and Verbena and staying with Liliana and encouraging Liliana to speak the English that she was better at than she thought she was. And I remember at Augusto and Verbena's having the best ravioli I have ever tasted in my life, with a cream and cheese and rosemary sauce. And I remember it well, and that was 22 years ago. One of the things I've enjoyed a lot about my association with Marcello and Daniela and Andrea is the conversations we've had. I love the way he took Andrea's childish questions like, "Why is the sky blue?" seriously. And one time we were talking about differences, and Marcello said, "You need to pay attention to the differences that matter." And this has stayed with me ever since, and I often think about it when I notice differences between me and other people, and I think it's also very important to look for the similarities. In conclusion, Marcello, I really value your role as a friend and a teacher in my life. You are my role model in your determination to excel at everything you do. You are the only person I have ever met whose slide nights are more like documentaries. I love the way you have managed to balance the heart and the head in your life. And to me, you are like an old slipper. We don't see each other for years and years, but when we do, I feel like I slip right back into our comfortable friendship very easily, and that's a rare thing.
Elspeth McLachlan is a distinguished active neurologist from Sydney, where she became professor and for some time Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of New South Wales, and she is now at the Prince of Wales Medical Research Institute. She followed a successful research career and has been behind much of the history of neuroscience in Australia and has been a very close companion of Marcello in this adventure. Marcello claims that he was taken aback by this energetic and fascinating young woman scientist since the early national scientific meetings. It may give a glimpse of what it is like to be a neuroscientist since the early 70s. Elspeth McLachlan.
Thank you. Well, I'm very privileged to have been invited to speak tonight, and I feel I really can't match up to the people who know Marcello a lot better than me. My experiences with Marcello have nearly always been at scientific meetings, where we socialised together quite a lot over a very many number of years, and it's always been a great pleasure to meet him, and particularly to meet Daniela, who doesn't come to the scientific meetings quite as much. I don't have a lot of stories about Marcello to tell, but I thought I'd just tell you 2 or 3 things, a little bit scientific, some of them, that reminded me of what he was like. At the meetings that we went to together, I was always very impressed by things you've already heard, how charming he is, particularly to the girls, how he really is loads of fun. He talks and talks and talks and talks. Gets you in a corner and talks about philosophy. It was fantastic, absolutely amazing. And I was so stunned that this could happen at a scientific meeting on neuroscience, particularly autonomic nervous system. And the other thing that he did was he played music. And you've all heard a little bit about that, and we're going to hear a lot about that in the next couple of days. And the music was fantastic for me because I love Latin American music, and that was what he was playing on his guitar when I first came across that. Anyway, to go back to it, where I first met him, when I first met him, didn't meet him, heard him, saw him, I didn't see him because the lecture theatre was completely black. As you might have thought, it was completely black because Marcello came from Italy, having worked with Giorgio Gabella, not on electron microscopy, but on using a particularly irritating technique, which was called the Falk-Hillard technique, which was very new and trendy, to demonstrate catecholamines. And in... how do I get the next one? There we go, not the next one. And in this technique, which you can see here over there on the right, this is one of the pictures from a very early paper of Marcello's. They don't look as easy to see when you show it on a slide in a completely darkened room. All you can see is this little tracing of white little spots. And I was always fascinated that he could give this complete talk, which none of us could understand a word of, because he spoke in Italian, almost. No, it wasn't Italian. It was English, very fast, very thick accent, and complete darkness. And we were supposed to come out at the end knowing some new exciting feature of neuroscience, and it was really quite difficult. But he wrote lots and lots of papers about the adrenergic nervous system. And Marcello's particular skill was in, as has been alluded to, dissection, and he had a wonderful way of converting everything that was three-dimensional into 2 dimensions. And I guess he did that perfectly well in the way that's illustrated here. This is a diagram that I think Marcello drew, but John, were you involved with this as well? In drawing that picture? Or was it all Marcello? It's a Marcello picture? I thought it was a Marcello picture. This picture is in almost every textbook in the world now to show people how the gut is formed, and it was the way Marcello learned to split it up in the 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions that was just so miraculous. And I think that he has that way of doing things that simplifies all sorts of things. And this was the introduction of the time when he worked with John, which was a long and productive period. Now, I'm not going to talk about all that science, it was really very boring, but they were very good on techniques and they helped me a lot in my career doing a couple of difficult techniques that were much easier to use than the Falk-Hillard one. The next thing I wanted to say was that Marcello did spend, as we know, several years in Jeff Bernstock's laboratory, and the most remarkable thing about it was that he actually never published a paper out of that with Jeff Bernstock's name on it, and I think there are only 1 or 2 other people who survived that period similarly. I was told the other day that Terry Bennett was one of them, but does anyone know if there was another?
Terry Bennett got a Bernstock on a paper.
Did he? Oh, well, somebody told me the other day that he didn't, but anyway, Marcello didn't because I've checked, and there were only 2 publications with the 2 names on together. One of them's a book, a huge book, which I've got, and the other one was a little letter where they were trying to tell clinicians what purinergic nerves were, which must have really fascinated them. Now, Marcello has, however, always been very close to Jeff and very dedicated to Jeff. This is a more recent picture in which you can see Marcello kneeling beside Jeff. Now, I wasn't sure. I mean, Jeff has changed a lot from that picture that you saw earlier. As you see, his beard's gone white. He's changed his shape quite a lot from that gaucho outfit. And not only that, he's looking very approvingly at whatever it is that Marcello's doing to Nomi's back. I'm not sure what it is, Marcello. So Marcello has always been fond of Jeff Bernstock. He's always... I want to say a little bit about his diet. Barbary mentioned his diet. I was stunned to think that anyone who was so physically active and did all these wonderful things could survive on pasta, of course. Oranges. He does eat oranges. No other fruit, but he does eat oranges. He eats masses of potatoes, mostly as chips, and lots of meat. And it was pretty impressive to me that this fantastic diet could end up with him being that shape, which is getting close to Jeff Bernstock. Now, of course, that was some time ago, and I think he's lost some of that weight. But at this particular meeting, he was looking rather chubby, along with another friend of ours who's here, who was similarly looking a bit chubby that day. That was a very nice meeting, and we were all eating a lot. Now, I wanted to end up with my one story, which is about Bill and Sue, and Marcello on one very memorable occasion, which was sometime in the 90s. I can't actually remember when. Marcello is a great windsurfer, as you've heard, and in fact he was such a great windsurfer he spent quite a long time with a neck brace on that I always thought he meant he'd broken his neck doing windsurfing. That happened quite soon after he started doing that. But after he got better from that, he said, OK, Bill's taken up windsurfing, we're going to go across to Kangaroo Island. So I came over to Adelaide to work in Bill's lab one day, and Sue and Bill very kindly asked me to stay the night, and the next night we were going to go to Kangaroo Island and have lobster, lots and lots of lobster. So I went to stay with Bill and Sue, and that was a memorable night for me because Bill very kindly blew up a mattress, an inflatable mattress on the floor, and unfortunately after they'd gone to bed the mattress developed a leak and they didn't provide the mending kit, which I really would have needed to have a good night's sleep. So we got up very early the next morning, and Bill and Marcello and all of us set off, and we went down to a beach somewhere down there, around here, and they set off to go to Kangaroo Island. The only problem was, just as they were getting unpacked and down to the water, Marcello suddenly announced he'd forgotten his centreboard. And absolutely unaffected by this, he just jumped into the sea, jumped onto this piece of wood and with a sail on it and took off. And Bill was terrified and had to go off after him because they were going to Kangaroo Island right across the strait without a centreboard on Marcello's boat, on Marcello's surfboard. So that meant that they went the whole way on one tack. Is that right, Marcello? Well, Sue and Daniela and I got on the ferry and we went over to Kangaroo Island, a little bit oblivious to the dangers involved in this activity of Marcello's. And we waited on a beach for hours and hours. You remember, hours and hours. And Daniela was getting a bit nervous. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And then he appeared from somewhere, which was because he'd landed miles down the island. And he just said hello, and then he disappeared, and he ran around the sailing club trying to find some person who would lend him a centreboard to go back the next day. And of course, nobody would. So I still don't know how you got home. Anyway, Marcello, it's been a great privilege to know you scientifically, personally, and to hear all about all these exploits, which I think are absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for everything.
We count Bill and Sue blessing amongst our dearest friends, and we've done together lots of amazing trips, camping trips in distant and remote parts of the outback and in deserted islands. Bill shares with Marcello, of course, the passion for neuroscience, but also a passion for adventures at sea and intellectual pursuit. Bill deep knowledge of English and his very sharp mind continue to be for us a constant source of inspiration and challenge for both of us. Be blessing.
Well, a pleasure indeed to share a few thoughts about my dear friend Marcello, and thank you, Daniela. Marcello actually did change my life he made it more complex and richer and a much more enjoyable life. Some of the scientific contributions that Marcello made I'll mention tomorrow, because I'm lucky I've got a double bill. I suppose really that both Marcello and I came from quite ordinary sort of families, and in many ways, without being over-modest, I was an ordinary kind of person. When I went to Prince Alfred Hospital, they showed me I could be a proper doctor. But when I got to Adelaide and met Marcello, he didn't really have the same concept that I have of ordinary. And I don't know what it is that makes some people go past the boundaries and other people don't. But certainly it's a characteristic of Marcello that he's always looking for a wider, longer, bigger boundary. And in doing that, I've been lucky in the second half of my life to be taken along. I would never have gone on any adventures like crossing the Gulf or, as I'll mention later on, some other adventures by myself. I turned out I could do it fearfully quite often, and they were always miles ahead. But it was a big contribution to me to see that the boundaries could be changed. Marcello actually, I'm his principal windsurfing partner. That's one of my big advantages in life. And when you windsurf together, you really have to get on, because there's always the question, should we go upwind or not? I'm a bit of, I like going downwind a fair bit and chancing and hoping the wind will shift. But Marcello's always, part of his life actually, he wants to be upwind. He wants to have things in reserve. If he'd been a World War I fighter pilot, he would have been up there in the clouds to just pop down now and then and shoot down a few British. I don't know what side they were on actually, but then he would have gone for height. And he always plans things. He always has a careful, even though he does special things, he has a careful plan. And once when we did, let me say, he plans everything as if he's actually crossing the Andes in Patagonia, even though he's stuck here in Australia. In his mind, it's the Andes. So when we went once down the Coorong, a long way we were going to go, we started and we had our boards so loaded up with all the gear in the world that the 30-knot wind we were tacking into was just too much. And it was a rare occasion, but Marcello fell off. And he had his backpack on and he disappeared down. And after a while I was thinking, that's a fair while for him to come up, but I presume he'll manage it. And so he did come up, a flustering Marcello, unusually flustered Marcello. So I went over and I helped him with his problem. And I said, Marcello, this backpack is heavy. And I said, let me have a look at it. And I said, well, you've got your crampons, but why did you bring the heavy ice axe? But never mind, there it was. The ice axe was handy for hitting in the tent peaks later on. So, as part of thinking about Marcello and understanding him, there is a problem in that he does have this dual citizenship in his life. Personally, I'm a citizen of Australia and I never feel any different, but actually it's fundamental to Marcello's life that he has two, really, citizenships, his European citizenship and his Australian citizenship. The most uncomfortable I've ever seen Marcello is in a working class hotel with all that those tiles and sort of the tab going and the guys drinking their beer, and Marcello just doesn't fit in there at all. He's an embarrassment. what he's thinking is where he'd rather be is back in Europe, as he always fantasises with his Italian peasants, all sitting around drinking short blacks and talking about Kierkegaard and Husserl and all the famous European philosophers. And so he does have this problem. It's not a problem, it's a richness, but indeed I think it is a problem because sooner or later, he's going to run out of frequent flyer points. And Marcello and Daniela will have to decide. And it's not easy because the strength of what's in Europe are often the weaknesses of what's in our country. But when he does come back, it is reassuring to see the sort of forthrightness and the simplicity of the Australian life reasserting itself in Marcello. Another aspect of Marcello is that he doesn't really like individual things as much as I do. It's not a criticism, it's a description. He likes individual music, but he doesn't like a rose is a rose is a rose, and everything is what it is and not something different. But Marcello's not interested in a rose as such, he's interested in the idea of a rose. And I think that one of the small contributions I've made in Marcello's life is to try and make him interested in an individual rose. But surprisingly, you wouldn't think it by reading and talking to him about his abstract ideas. He and I have never really, luckily in windsurfing you can't hear each other. But actually, when we did go together through the Murray Mouth, it was Marcello's idea, and we set off from Goolwa. All these years I've kept something that Marcello wrote. I think actually his English has got worse over the years. But you'll see that he's actually writing in English. This was 1993 in our little windsurfing magazine. We actually went from Victor Harbour, it wasn't my idea, and we sailed in through the Murray Mouth, which was a very frightening prospect for me. So, the gentle breeze and the distant sight of the Goolwa beaches and the line of the 120-mile ocean beach disappearing to the horizon attracted us, despite the advanced afternoon. The breakers from the sea at Goolwa did not appear as mighty as we remembered. The tide was going to peak at 4 p.m. at the mouth, so we decided to keep going and accept the inevitable of having to enter the Murray Mouth. He missed a comma. He has trouble with commas, but never mind. I'm Prince, as well as his windsurfing partner, I'm his comma advisor. To enter the Murray Mouth, comma, or land at its entrance to return via the Coorong waters to Goolwa. The broad reach with 10 knots of wind took us gently southeasterly along the never-ending ocean beach. Finally, the interruption of the sand dunes marked the mouth. The white waters appeared almost continuous along the entrance from our angle, and we raised in ourselves the tension of attempting to ride the waves and land at the northern lip. That's Marcello, went first, trying to miss the bigger sets of waves. Yeah, he abandoned me, actually. There must be a trick to calculate when to expect the low sets, but we didn't find it. For the first two waves miraculously pushed me about 100 metres without breaking, but the third didn't miss my board. I was a sitting duck with little or no wind to escape, and after that I did not count the waves that pounded me and eventually ripped my precious board from my hands, almost ripping a finger. I wish I'd learned more about body surfing, for I could not keep up with the wonderful wave riding of my board all by itself, while I felt I was going backwards into the waves. Eventually I was reunited with my intact board in waist-depth water. I then looked back to search for Bill. So you see, you have to admit that he's a very fine writer, he's a very talented man, and I'm a very, very lucky person to have him as my friend. Thank you.
That's better.
Judy's usually the one who falls off the back of the stage. Who? Judy. At least 3 times.
Seriously?
Get a step back. Step back.
I'm feeling very good something. That's great.
Just test the mic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Yeah. Ha. Ha here. Two. Perfect. Thank you. Well played. Fantastic. Were you all right? Were you all right in yourself? Like a delay? Didn't even matter. You ready?
Yeah. You tell me when you're ready. Hello, we have to restart. We have to restart. We are ready to start. We are starting now. We want to start again. We are ready to start. Please, we are going to start again. Ronnie Tahini is a true professional and an explorer. Ronnie tours Europe every year. She writes her own material and she runs a record label and she runs the whole operation from the beach. In 1993, Ronnie was awarded the recognition of the most outstanding individual performer in Australia. Ronnie is the 9th of 12 children from Edithburgh, the peninsula of York. Now, why wait to be dead for 200 years before enjoying the inevitable flame and acclaim, she inquires. I intend to be fondly remembered as one of history's great composers right now, she says. And we are very lucky that Ronnie is not in Europe, but she's here tonight, and that she's going to treat us with her talent and effervescent personality. Ronnie Tahini.
Cheers. What Daniela neglected to say was that the real quote was that I'm not going to stick around until I'm dead for 200 years to get the fame and acclaim of being a composer. I intend to do it now, that's correct. And I intend to do it with rudimentary tantrums, intermediate somethings, and advanced syphilis. As a Beethoven a follower, I think that would be okay. This is a club for the weird. You're welcome if you're too shy to appear. Members will never come near you. We try to capture a social affair. We'd like to get lucky, we've got ourselves there. Now stand back and watch us all go nowhere. 'Cause it's a tricky navigation when the egg's drawn to the face. It could change this situation from a stately glacial pace. We could try it once, try it twice, we're trying even now. We're the odd-shaped fruit brigade. It's why the others have it made. There's a line that they never would cross at any time. Guarding the gates of their hearts and their minds. They're too refined for seduction. Underneath, courage is losing its hair and its teeth. We're hanging on with some hope and belief. Leave all the rest to deduction. 'Cause it's a tricky navigation when the egg's drawn to the face. It could change this situation from a stately glacial pace. They could try it once, try it twice, trying even now. In the odd-shaped fruit parade, it's why the others have it made. Why the others have it made. Yeah, they have it made. Let them have it. They can have it. Yeah, have it. Let them have it. 'Cause it's a tricky navigation when the egg's drawn to the face. It could change a situation from a stately glacial pace. We could try it once, try it twice, trying even now. Turn away from this charade and let the others, all the others have it made. Cheers. Cheers, and thanks. And you'd have to, you know, the first thing you'd have to be asking is, what is someone like me doing in Marcello's life? Well, that will come a little bit later. It's true what Daniela said a little bit earlier. She said that I was from a family, I'm the ninth in a family of 12 children, which is not so different from, well, Marcello doesn't have that many people, but I'm from Edithburgh, York Peninsula. Some of you would know that that is actually the cultural centre of the earth. It's got a population of 200 people, and that's including the sheep carcasses in the main street down the middle, right? So I've not always been the incredible, you know, the mental giant that you see here tonight. That took a bit later. In fact, when I knew this weekend was happening, when I knew this was going to happen down here, and I knew the people who were coming here, the collection of, incredible minds here tonight, I went off and had, the first time, went off and had an IQ test. Because I thought that might be very useful. And it came back saying, overachieving moron. So you do. So I haven't always, as I said, I haven't always been the mental giant you see tonight. So I met Marcello 9 years ago when I moved into the neighbourhood, and I met him on the beach, as everyone seems to meet him on the beach. Bill Blessing, I can echo your story a mile off. There's many things that I remember about Marcello. I was struck by his youthful energy and his incredible vibrance, his open mind, and his ability to Google every wide-ranging interest that he has, which is pretty massive, like this, in about 1 second flat. You know, he was just doing it all. And he told me, he said, oh, you're from York Peninsula. Oh, well, let me tell you a story. Well, I windsurfed from here, Seacliff, and and latitudinally, you know, Edithburgh or Port Vincent is latitudinally opposite the Gulf, yeah, for the locals. And he said, I travelled across there, it took me 3 hours. And then when I got the other side at Port Vincent, which is a little bit sort of like it's the Sydney, you know, when you got Adelaide, you've got Sydney, you've got Edithburgh, you've got Port Vincent, right? And he said, I then realised once I got there that I had to be at a dinner party that night in Adelaide. So what I did was I left my sail and my board with someone in Vincent, and then I proceeded to hitchhike. And this main road, the main tarmac road on the York Peninsula, is 1 kilometre inland, yeah? So there's a frogman in his total neoprene wetsuit, 1 kilometre inland with a thumb out, getting a lift back to Adelaide. And he said to me, do you know the kind of people, the only kind of people who will pick up a man in a wetsuit 1 kilometre inland? And I said, absolutely, and I want to go with you wherever you go out, at any time you go out, I want to be with you because you're going to be the most fantastic guy that probably, if you're lucky enough, you'll get arrested, and I'll get arrested as well. That's Marcello, a bit of a larrikin. And so we met 9 years ago, and since then, periodically over that time, we've got together at his place with Daniela and had these great social events, always ending up in live music. And then sometimes he and I have got together for casual get-together, sort of casual conversation where I usually expound my, you know, the finer principles of my latest scientific theory, in which he sort of looks at me and goes, no future, and goes and makes coffee. And it was only at the Gov, for the locals once again, I'm sorry to be so parochial, but at the Gov this year was when Marcello and I managed to share the stage for the first time as two professional musicians at a concert, and I hope it's the first of many collaborations in the future that we have with science and mind and you know, and music and everything else if I can. And he's managed so far to introduce me to a bunch of fantastic people. Most of them are mad professors and great neurologists and colleagues, and I, in return, have introduced him to desperate and dull-bludgeon musicians, bohemian artists, sort of marginals and misfits, and I think it's a pretty fair exchange. And so, And so when Marcello asked me some months ago, he said, we've got a weekend coming up, could you help me out? I said, sure, where do you want me to set up the bar? After unstacking the chairs. And he said, no, I'd like you to sort of speak a little bit about our relationship as a musician with science and music, and I'd also like you to play a song or two as well. I'm sure tomorrow night we can do a bit of a jam where all of us can probably play, but for tonight I better do one of the parts, which is I'll do a song, right? Of all the days you keep, which ones keep you from your sleep? Ones you call your photograph. A phase that comes and goes while deep inside the emptiness grows. Proof of your old photograph. I'm tired and I'm worn out. Seems I cannot find a reason for trying to stick it out. And I say I'm civilized, which means I'm a savage in disguise, a dark tormented of the half. This crusade that I'm marching in wakes a voice that sleeps within, disturbing my old photograph. I'm tired and I'm worn out. Seems I cannot find a reason for trying to stick it out. But I will live each day I live in the hope that I'll find my own photograph. And I will live each day I live that I find my photograph. My passion has left me like some fair-weathered friend on a winter's beach, a bleak and barren photograph. I wake exhausted from my rest, a masterpiece in bitterness, destroying my own photograph. And if you only knew what little is left of me, I cannot see the forest for the trees. I don't know what's out or up, and I'm just about to give it all. I'm tired and I'm worn out. Seems I cannot find a reason for trying to stick it out. But I will live each day I live in the hope that I'll find my own photograph. And I will live each day I live in the hope that I find my photograph. I will live each day I live in the hope that I find my own photograph. Yeah, I will live each day I live in the hope that Gracias. Oh, it's my first groupie for the evening. Now, well, Marcello, this one does involve you greatly. Of course, we're all here tonight for you. And, basically you're a man of all seasons and all reasons, and you're many things to many people around the world. And tonight we've just got a microcosm of what those people could possibly be. And I thank you so much for your incredible open-mindedness, I think. And every discussion with Marcello is always an education, which is a brilliant thing. And probably the best way I can summarise Marcello, my relationship with Marcello, and certainly as a musician, would be in this next piece, which is a poem that I wrote earlier this year, which was specifically written for Marcello. Well, it could have been. It wasn't really, but it could have been. And it's Danny. Well, it's Daniela's favourite, and so I'm doing it. And in 1813, Jane Austen created a character which leapt from the pages of the book Pride and Prejudice and became immortal. The daring, dashing Mr. Darcy. Played in the BBC production by an equally daring and dashing English actor. And today, in the 1990s, it was reproduced, this character, in Bridget Jones's Diary. And today, with the generation of Facebook, we've got women around the world who still say that if given the chance, their favourite man of this world would be the daring, dashing Mr. Darcy. This next one is a result of 13 years of informal interviews that I've conducted around the world while I'm on tour. Mostly with women, all of them single, and all of them clueless as to why they cannot seem to find their daring, dashing Mr. Darcy. Had Jane Austen been an Italian author, there would be no question that, of course, her central character would have been Signor Marcello Costa. It goes like this. In a world of expectations and standards far too high, I want a Mr. Darcy before I die. Dependable, capable, passionate and bright, intelligent and witty, athletic, erudite. Someone of integrity, somewhat of a gent. In a world of extraordinary men, this one's heaven sent. He has to be romantic, he has to be fetching, and he must have a character that's done its own sketching, because I want him fully rendered with a sense of humour dry. You see, I want a Darcy before I die. We could ask Eliza Bennet. We could ask that Bridget too. We could even squeeze the truth from Germaine Greer before we're through. The competition's fierce for we girls upon this earth, but surely there must be more than one Colin Firth. So I've asked in Scandinavia, where divorce rates are high. And I've asked Sheila's down under to this brutal reply. What, blokes? They're all a bunch of bastards and we couldn't give a shag, because every good one is married or taken or a fag. And I've asked in Beirut, where they've even slept around, from New York to Rio, an old London town. But they don't want Peter Allen. They don't want a clown. They don't want some other well-meaning letdown with a beggar's bowl of courage and a tincture of good sense, a guy to bore the pants off us by sitting on the fence. We want someone who's challenging, but underneath still shy. Seems we all want a Darcy before we die, who's solid and stable, with a quick and quirky mind, honest and able, considerate and kind, thoughtful and provoking, but not into control, disciplined and driven, whose career's not on the dole, with no pride or prejudice, no addictions as such, just loyal and mannerly. Am I asking too much? Because it's really got me baffled. It's harder than I thought. I'm a girl with standards. These guys keep falling short. It's become quite a mystery, a pandemic, and a trend. But it makes me feel much better if I blame it all on men. You see, I don't need a mirror. I don't need to change at all. Surely it's not me who's aged, anal, rigid, twee, intolerant and cynical, or frumpy in my thinking, a cyclops who cannot score. That's for all the other girls. I've heard their shit before. Now, I've done my homework and I know I'm pretty hot. Surely it's not me who's shrouded in self-delusion with one massive personal blind spot. And so, with expectations and standards never too high, I deserve a Darcy before I die. Dependable, capable, passionate and bright, intelligent and witty, athletic, erudite, and all those things I said before I really meant in this room of extraordinary men. Surely one of you's 100%. Because I don't need to compromise, and nothing else will do. Because, guys, I'm looking for a Darcy. Does he sound a bit like you? Molto gracias, molto gracias. Thank you, Marcello. Cheers, folks.
Giorgio, Marcello's brother, made his way all from Argentina to celebrate his life and dance and his life with Marcello. And I think that the deep affection that binds the two brothers is a testimony of the skills that Giorgio had to look after his younger and sometimes not so easy brother. We are counting on Giorgio to tell us about the early days of Marcello because he knew him well before we all did. Giorgio Costa.
I'm Giorgio, and before starting, I would like to carry out a small test because I feel that this microphone is better than this. Can it be? Okay, I'll say the same thing twice. I am Giorgio, Marcello's elder brother. I am Giorgio, Marcello's elder brother. Unfortunately, I have to push this one.
So you just
Yes.
okay?
Oh, it's already there. I wonder whether you are sure that I am Giorgio Marcello's elder brother. As the older member of our family, it is my duty and privilege to outline Marcello's historic profile, something that not even himself can do better than me. I do not intend to speak about neuroscience. You must agree that it would be silly, wouldn't you? It would not be silly instead talking about Daniela, Andrea, Kat, Harino, and Orlando, people you may have heard of sometime, somewhere, but certainly other people will do the job, so I will not. I'll speak of my brother's history instead. The origin of our surname. Costa is not completely clear. Some scholars say that our ancestor lived in a seaside, the coast, the Costa. Other theory goes as far as Constantine, the Roman emperor who legalized the Christian religion in 310 AD. And because of such a decision, he was later properly punished by his descendant, who cut his name in two to retain the Costa part of it only. If Templars and had any Costa among their warriors, we don't know. No Costa seems to have been hired by Cristoforo Colombo while setting his caravels on the way to America. Let's then start our story from a solid ground. In 1850, when our grandfather Giulio was born in a little village of northern Italy. Here is grandfather Giulio. Our country is a poor country at the time, and poor are most of the Italian, like him. But he is intelligent and full of energy to open up new horizons for his family. In Nice, he jumps aboard a ship bound to South America. We don't know whether a cutter or a steamer. He decided that Rio de Janeiro is too hot a place to stay and stops in Montevideo, Uruguay, where our father, Dalmiro, was born at the end of 19th century. Later, the family, well off at last, returns to Italy when Dalmiro is still a little boy. He becomes an engineer and meets our mother Verbena, born in the island of Sardinia. Mussolini's regime does not prevent myself and Marcello being born, both in Torino, 4 years apart. Second World War fully enters in our lives, gently at first, since traditional war in history are fought on the battlefront, far away from towns. In that case, Italy battles on the Russian front with the Germans. Towns only used to suffer air raids by the Allies, most of them aimed to military or industrial targets. Meantime, Marcello grows up. But in July 1943, Mussolini is ousted from power by his own party. A new government takes office and signs an armistice with the Allies in the southern Italy. And we, the great majority of Italians, find the German state in our country are suddenly our enemies. It was then when we learned what war meant. Mussolini, at first kept in custody by the new Italian government and soon fled by Nazi commando, founds a puppet republic on the shores of Garda Lake, calling the whole of male population under arms. Young people then go to the mountains to fight Nazis and fascists. Among them, our brother Guy, aged 21. Our father Dalmiro, a building contractor and professor of hydraulics at Turin University, becomes a high official of the so-called resistance committee in northern Italy, which aim is to set guerrilla strategy and link their movement with American and British armies. His beloved son is murdered by Nazi platoon, and he travels 80 kilometers in a bicycle to recover his body. When Gestapo finally captures him on 24 December 1944, the end of the war is only 4 months ahead. Mussolini is executed and Italy is at last free of Germans. But our father leaves us forever 1 month later, his heart broken by sorrow and by Nazi tortures alike. The after-war means freedom, but our country is destroyed. To us, our mountains are always the best refuge. Our family now with Augusto, our beloved stepfather, settles in Argentina, where Marcello's story really starts. While little boys dreams owning a bicycle or a drum, he sells his bicycle to buy a set of colors and paint brushes in order to paint beautiful pictures, which soon find their place in the streets, but also in our galleries, as well as in our homes where you can easily find them. His art career ends very soon when he declares that this world is too stuffed with painters while in serious deficiency of scientists, an opinion which now seems difficult to share in view of the consistency of this audience. Brushes and colors are quickly sold out in order to buy a microscope to examine every single piece of paper, leaf, or whatever lousy stuff crosses his way. This was his actual and final destiny, to be a scientist. If I close my eyes, I still see a cupboard full of small glasses, which the corpses of tiny ectoplasms, vegetables, and incredible beings laid certainly not in peace. A guitar also took place at our home, but I'm not able to say what piece of furniture he had sold in order to buy it. 4 years difference in our ages start counting. Along the 50s, our lives follow different lines and almost never come close one another. I remember having taken notice of his great achievement in mountaineering, his 1959 expedition to Yellow Continental. About that expedition, you might have something before. Practically, when the whole operation was over, and only learned about the famous can containing the lost message to posterity shortly before 205 expeditions set up to find it. Did any of you miss Marcello films short at the time? I recommend it to you. I wasn't there too. But the age of 20 comes also to Marcello when our family decided to settle back to Italy after more than 10 years in Argentina. We are in 1960, and Marcello wants to say goodbye to South America with a long tour through Bolivia, Peru, the Amazonia, and the rest of Brazil. Nobody is ready to accompany him in such a long journey, some 20,000 kilometers. No problem, he publishes an appeal on the daily paper in search of a suitable mate. After leaving aside a potential old evangelical preacher, a potential young gold searcher, and a lady in search of a male, I decide to postpone my degree and accompany him and set off with him, thereby finding a brother that I had all the time, but whom I had never discovered. One then spent 3 fascinating months climbing mountains. Titicaca Lake, in Peruvian Cordillera Blanca, crossing the Andes with the highest railway in the world, more than 4,800 meters above sea level, visiting ore mines where Indians are exploited by multinational big companies, descending the Amazonian side of Cordillera to visit tribes of Indians, very recently reached by civilization. Then down to Ucayali River, one of the 2 main sources of the Amazon, where our long river journey starts. Can you notice the bag on top of it? No.
It's got his eye sex.
Yeah. Crossing the border between Peru and Brazil in comfortable boats, always surrounded by preachers, drunkards, smugglers, prostitutes, and all kinds of nuts, or simple caboclo employed in the exploitation of rubber. You could have found both brothers on top of the flat roof of the Amazonian boat with Marcello playing a new guitar, while week after week they are approaching Manaus, then Belém, and the Amazon River. Stuck in apparently isolated corners, such as it was the town of Belém at the time, we are lucky to join the first caravan of ordinary cars allowed to open the new roadway linking the Amazonia to Brasilia, the newly founded Brasilia capital, still in enormous job site in progress. This is the parliament. Back at home, Marcello soon leaves Argentina for good. From that moment on, our ways part again, physically speaking, but have never meant any distance between us again. So I can closely follow his new life in Italy. his university studies, his political struggles, his service in the army, his discovery of Daniela. His discovery of this land of kangaroos I am stepping on now. And finally, the birth of André. I'm sorry, what is it? Okay, just a moment, please. It jumped there. Something happened, please. How can I get
Past it, or was it not there?
something happened because it jumped a lot of pictures here. Yep. No. Andre. Andre. Quiet life or an end of adventures? Absolutely not. In 1994, Marcello fulfills one of his dreams to get back to the Yellow Continental, involving in that adventure his brother, a friend, his son, his nephew, and myself. When in 201 my son Guy dies in the French Alps, he is on my side to throw his ashes to the wind. Later, after the already mentioned search of the little canvas message to posterity, we still rode horses following the trail left by my son some years ago in Patagonia. A lonely area not yet discovered by the Lonely Planet book. Now you have the right to wonder when will the neuroscientist Marcello stop climbing mountains? The answer you may guess after hearing what happened to us a few months ago in Chile, on the way to the top of Villarrica volcano. We had found experienced guides who were supposed to lead us and some young people up to the top. Ask if we need boots, rampons, piolet, Gore-Tex garments, or any piece of equipment. No, thank you. We all these items was what our answer. After some hours of steady walk, the leader says, lunchtime. Everybody takes his sandwich, power bar, dry fruit, and similar stuff out of his sack. We also throw our arms into the rucksack to pick up our ration of calories. Surprise, nothing inside. Not even a toffee. What had happened? We had simply forgotten our food down at the hotel. Did we get any food from our fellow climbers? Of course not. They did not dare to offend such experienced old mountaineers who probably were fasting for some good mysterious reason. An embarrassed silence falls upon us suddenly. Marcello breaks it and says, Giorgio, don't you think the time is ripe to stop pretending to climb mountains and start being the grandfather we are for our grandchildren? I don't know if you believe that Marcello is going to do that. Would you? Thank you.
like, you know, the jail warden, no, how do you say it? Jail keeper. This is Alan now.
Yes, this is the wrong one there.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Another time. I have a feeling that I'm not going to be popular tonight. I would like to introduce Alan North. Alan is currently at Manchester University, where he's Vice President and Dean at the Faculty of Medical and Human Sciences, and also in parallel Dean of Life Sciences. His research spans from Japan to the United States, and we've had the pleasure of being guest of Alan in the beautiful Oregon. Marcello and Alan share a passion for the mountains, in addition to their love for science. Alan North.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and thank you for asking me to come and speak to you. I bring you greetings from many nether, smaller regions of the world. I happened to bump into Thomas Hochfeld, for example. He said hello. And that other fellow, what's his name, Bernstone, he also said hello. But I think the reason that you wanted me to speak was to bring you into a kind of third dimension. It's clear that many of your adventures, Marcello, have been on the horizontal plane. So I thought that I would elevate you into a third dimension, although I was very disturbed, I have to say, to read an abstract of yours at a meeting in Tasmania this January, in which you referred to the fourth dimension. And I guess we'll hear more about that tomorrow. That may be a little beyond me. I'm going to be very selfish to begin with and share this image with you, because it introduces me to the main subject of the evening, which is the subject of summits. Summits may resonate with you with respect to Marcello. He's been in search of them most of his life, and there's not a lot of sign of it slowing down. Summits are not only mountains. If you look up summits in a dictionary, you'll find all kinds of definitions. They're pinnacles of achievement, and I think in Marcello we see many examples of that. But the reason I'm being selfish by showing you this first one is because it's 40 years to the day, give or take a time zone or two, since I stood on the top of this particular 7,000-meter summit in the actually in the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Summits don't have to be high. Some of them can be quite low. Here's one barely above sea level. And I've chosen this one to remind me of greetings from Leonie. She is my eldest daughter, and she lived with Marcello and Daniela for a few months in her very formative years. In fact, Andrea was reminding me of that just a few minutes ago. But the neat thing about summits is they don't have to be famous either. This is the only one that I could find in my collection, which actually is in Italy, although the particular side that you're looking at is from Switzerland. Although, of course, when you get to the summit of it, it doesn't really matter because you're in both Italy and Switzerland. Some of these summits are famous, but of course some of them are much less famous, much more distant. And the one that I'd like to give you an example of It's not actually the fellow climbing up the back of this chap's nose here, but it's actually the summit that you can see way down in the far left distance. Here. We're now talking about summits which are about 73 degrees north, and this is a summit that we saw, and a few days later we approached, and a few days later we were on the top of, and we marked our presence there by building a little cairn. And it seems to me this has got a lot of resonance with Marcello's life, because since I've known him, when he's seen something in the distance, he's usually gone after it in a fairly single-minded way. And that does not really matter whether it's an intellectual question or a physical question. And you've heard other stories of that this evening. He sees a coastline in the distance. It happens to be 3 or 4 hours away across the bay, but what matter? He goes after it. Here's Marcello on his own summit. You see the tendency to build a little pile of stones. This is me now entering the remit of the third continent, and this particular one is somewhere in the region of Banff in Canada. But what I want to spend most of the time on is bringing you down to earth with summits in Oregon. And I do believe that this may be the first one that Marcello achieved in his stay in Oregon. And as you can probably recognize, he's been pursued up this by me or somebody else. And this particular summit is probably about 30 feet above sea level. When Marcello was in Oregon, we got to thinking about other summits. And I suspect that some of this thinking was done in the evening on the terrace of my house. And there are a number of choices from Portland, and they're all visible from the institute in which we work there. Very fading into the distance here, you might be able to make out the summit of Mount St. Helens. Way faded away at the top. We were not too keen on Mount St. Helens because it had blown its top off about 10 years before, and it was already 300 or 400 meters lower than it used to be. So this was the other summit that you can see from the Volum Institute, and this one is Mount Hood. And we thought that would be an interesting peak. Now, of course, the only way to really get to know a summit is to sleep with it. And so Marcello and I decided that we'd take the approach of avoiding people by going up in the afternoon and coming down in the morning, which is an unusual way because most mountaineers go up in the morning and come down in the afternoon. So we took off on this particular excursion about midday one day. You can see Mount Hood up there in the distance. And the first approach to Mount Hood goes up a ski slope, at least what's left of a ski slope, in the month of May. And then as one climbs up, leave the moraine behind you and enter into the snowfields. And you can see it's pretty heavy going by that time of the afternoon. And here you can see the ice axe in his hand, which is probably the one that he was carrying in his back. Although, I suspect not, because I think this was an old one of mine that I'd lent to him in the forlorn hope that he might know how to use it. So here we are now with the sun starting to go down as we approach the higher regions of the peak. Mount Hood is about 10 or 11,000 feet above sea level, and still an active volcano, not sufficiently active that it's about to blow its top, but active in the sense that there's plenty of sulfurous fumes and so on rising from the crater. And you see the sun was already beginning to leave the peak by the time we approached the summit ridge. This is looking down over the crater of the volcano, which still murmurs away with a little bit of activity. And here we are, just as the sun was going down, up on the final summit ridge of Mount Hood. Now, our aspiration had been to actually sleep with the summit, but it turns out that the summit of Mount Hood is a little bit too, well, it's not quite flat enough to do that. So we got about as high as we possibly could and found a sort of place where we could level it out and put up a tent. So this is Marcello inside the tent. I'd like to think he was cooking dinner for me, but I suspect the converse might have been true. I think I probably just popped out to take the photograph of the tent. And then when we did walk a few steps to the summit of the peak, which you can't make out in this photograph, but it's right behind the tent, then you were treated to a spectacular view of the city of Portland, about 50 or 60 kilometers away. The following morning, the sun was just coming up from the doorway of the tent, and a few minutes later had risen sufficiently to start illuminating some of the nearby peaks. So here, for example, you can see on the right side Mount St. Helens, and on the left side Mount Adams, other major volcanoes of the Cascade Range of North America. As we looked out from the tent in the morning, you began to see a little bit of the situation in which we'd positioned ourselves. But in fact, I think looking the other way is probably better. You see the real summit of the mountain and the difficulty that we might have had actually embracing it. But still a pretty spectacular place to spend the night with Marcello. He must be making you very envious, Daniela. Yeah. By the time we started to descend the mountain, others were coming up the next morning, wondering what the hell these two Looney Tunes were doing descending the mountain at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then by the time we were back on the lower regions, we could look back again at the mountain that we'd just benighted. Back in Portland, sorry, these things are taking a little bit of a mind of their own. The image that I wanted to leave you with was this one of Marcello, and I think this was taken probably on the visit to Canada. And this was, of course, in the days before digital photography, when you could be quite creative in making double exposures. Yeah. It's been interesting listening to some of the other eulogies, you might say, this evening. But the one which has attracted me most, I think, was a comment by Bill Blessing about the virtues of being on a windsurfer, is that there's no possibility of having a conversation. And I have to say that I feel very much the same way about mountaineering. Certainly on Mount Hood and on our other excursions, I've been in the fortunate position that not only I, but also Marcello, was far too much out of breath to have any kind of serious conversation. And I have to say that I have regarded that as a great relief. If I were to choose any activity to do with Marcello, then it probably would be mountain climbing or windsurfing. On the other hand, not to put too fine a point on it, some of the most stimulating intellectual moments of my life have been in Marcello's company. And that's really the main reason that I wanted to come here and to be able to say that to you. Thank you very much, Marcello.
Seldom a choir has been put together with less professionality as the one that I'm going to introduce now. Marcello, myself, Giorgio, Daniela Rosteghin and Michele Costanzo, who are two lecturers of Italian at two South Australian universities. We decided to get together because of our passion for songs of the mountains and songs of the resistance against fascism. And we hope that it is this love that is going to get us through the evening. We will sing two pieces, which will, and the words will be screened on the projector there in English, so I don't have to, no one has to translate them. And if there are some songs that Italians are expected to sing all together, these are the ones.
Partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire. E se io muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e se io muoio da partigiano, tu mi devi seppellire lassù in montagna. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e seppellire lassù in montagna sotto l'ombra di un bel fiore. E le genti che passeranno, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e le genti che passeranno mi diranno che bel fiore. E questo è il fiore, il partigiano. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e questo è il fiore del partigiano morto per la libertà. E questo è il fiore del partigiano morto per la libertà.
Are we ready for the movie, for the DVD? Yes, just a moment of excitement due to the Italian songs. We have 15 minutes more to talk and enjoy ourselves. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Hey?
Are we having sound, the movies? With sound?
Yes, Hello, that's me, my friendly voice again. I wonder whether I'm going to pass the test for the MC. Oh, beautiful. Hello. Now for something special. The night is not finished. Please pay attention, something is coming. Okay, now I have a great pleasure of introducing Aldo Fasolo and Davide Lovisolo, who are academic researchers from the University of Torino, our alma mater university. Both participated with Marcello in the student movements of the 60s. And here is an excerpt of their interviews, as they could not come tonight with us.
Hello to everybody. My name is Aldo Fasolo. I am a biologist working at the University of Torino. And I would like to add something to what was so beautifully described by Davide Lovisolo, to the story of student unions, and also to the climate of the political issue in the late 60s in Torino, since it was the first point of our history together. But I would like to say a few words on my occasion to meet for the first time Marcello, since I met him several times for the first time. The first was when I was in high school. He was playing music in Cucina Malati Poveri, just in a feast of our student organization. It was a very charming idea that a boy just arriving from Argentina was playing and singing, as if I remember correctly, but sometimes you will remember what we want to remember. And it was playing and singing in Italian and in Spanish. Then the second time was bound to political situation in the 60s, and the student union, as was described before, was described by Davide, and there was the chance to be in Unione Goliardica Italiana, the organization with left students, where Marcello was radical probably in European terms, not in Italian terms, whereas I was on the more left part, bound to the Partito Comunista Italiano, even if never enrolled in this party. And where we had a little bit some different ideas, but at the moment the most important issue was to compare ideas, to make discussion. Anyway, to meet Marcello was for us in Torino, which was till a few years ago a very quiet, even if severely engaged in social issue city, was very interesting to meet Marcello, because everybody, every time he was taking with him new ideas, some provocative, some in some way a little bit utopistic ideas, some other very closely related to reality. So I have a lot of souvenirs which are in some way related to good and sometimes not bad, but a little bit fantastic ideas. When he was speaking about the teaching class at the university, the teaching class and teaching teachers in the university, it was not completed, it was out of a reality, but it was a way, it was trying to compel us to compare our system with other university, the worldwide organization of research. And for us it was in some way frustrating, but also full of expectations, hopes, which were just in some way applying and charging on Marcello's talks. Marcello talks a lot, and that's a very good idea, because he teaches a lot also in his narrative style. Marcello was a little bit a magician, just teaching us the way to have a paraformaldehyde at the humidity, the level of humidity exact to have the best reaction, and was in some way just acting as a teacher and also a master.
Good evening, or either evening or morning, I don't know, to everyone. My name is Davide Rovisol, I am a physiologist, and I owe to Marcello some of my first steps in this exciting experience of science. Marcello has left a big mark in Torino. In '65, when Marcello took the editorship of the Student Gazette, it was already in a deep crisis, and that brought in a very few years to some dramatic. In September '65, Marcello, that was former president of one of the student association, the UG, Union of Italian Goliardic Union, that was the left, center-left union. And, but Marcello didn't belong to any of these parties. He, I think, I recall it after, I was not aware in '65 that he was ascribed to the radical component, that was a very small component linked to very more than parties, to movements. He takes the charge to edit at least 3 issues before the end of the year. This was not a simple charge, because Ateneo was appeared in a very radical and unpredictable way. So making 3 issues in 3 months, more or less, was a serious charge. And this was particularly relevant and important because there was a very confused and very turmoil period for the university and for the student association. So to try the idea of having a more or less regular issuing of a gazette was also an effort to give students an open, transparent channel of information. And he succeeded in making 3 issues, September, October, and November '65. This is not particularly strange, it is not limited to Italy. It must be remembered that in '64, '65, there were the big turmoils at Berkeley University and in other universities, and then in France. So it was, something was changing not only in the little Torino and the sleepy Torino, but around us. November '65, it is election time, the environment is very confused, there are a lot of quarrels, and the editor tries to set some points to clarify minds of the students, trying to go beyond the small quarrels and the very short-sighted quarrels between local bosses. And the need to give a boost to scientific research that was very, very low consideration in these years. The editor announces the opening of a new survey. The title is very generic, about problems of today, with 3,000 questionnaires that would have been sent to the houses of 3,000 students. And then comes the last number, the last issue of Ateneo with Marcello as editor in January, February '66. That is the most important of this issue are the results of the survey announced in the preceding number. Actually, the survey was on the sexual education of the students and on what they thought about sexual problems. And some of the themes that were touched in the survey were sex before marriage, divorce. You must remember that here we are in '66, and a law that allowed people to divorce in Italy was approved after a strong fight in 9 years later, in '75. Birth control, another of the themes that was, it looked from the answers, it looks like the questionnaire was well thought and well. The results of our survey, history of the survey. This is part of the survey, and some of the results were very, very interesting. What came out was that the separation between students that declared to be Catholics and students that declared not to be strictly Catholic, to be laic, were not so strong. But the most striking fact, I didn't remember until I read Ateneo, what happened on the national and local press. La Stampa, the first torinese newspaper of Torino, titled Polemica, quarrel at the university for an equivocal survey, an immoral questionnaire sent to the students. But I think that this was probably the most important contribution that Marcello gave to as editor of Ateneo. Used today for if you want to understand how the mentality, how the minds were changing, in particularly among young people, and I think that very few understood what was happening.
The other was on social issues and the integration of the people, sometimes also in rather recent times also related to religion and biology. Some themes which are very hot, and as probably where they were at the beginning on Ateneo, the issues related to sexual behaviors and sexual attitudes and sexual choices in young people in Italy, in Torino. Every time we learned a lot, and some other times I have to say that Marcello was not completely correct. That's a very good idea, because a good teacher is also so able to change ideas. When he left for Australia, he was just thinking about a dreadful atomic war and just thinking to a new communities able to survive after the age of bombs. And that's really a good way to just to show its attitude, his attitude toward exploration, toward novelty. But in some way, it was just wrong, because we can speak several decades after, but at least till now, at the moment of the recording, he was, and anyway, he was not, probably also he was not able to cope with the reality of a new community in the desert of the center of Australia. Other times he was in some way really radical in his ideas. I always.
You never hear the end. Okay, that's it.
It's me again, our friend, your friendly MC. Now, who are the naughty ones on the back over there? I can see, but there is some unruly. There are some unruly characters over there. Let's see. Okay. All right then. Okay. Now, how could this evening not involve Andrea Costa, our only son, who could not share the burden with any other sibling to talk tonight? Andrea was born in Melbourne, and he has been our best guide to Australia. He's a native of this country. We owe to Andrea not only his love, but the commitment that Andrea and his lovely wife, Kat, who could not be here tonight because she's minding our 2.5 grandchildren. We owe them their commitment to our Italian heritage in maintaining the Italian language well into the third generations of our family. And so, Andrea Costa.
Good evening. Tonight I will share with you a small collection of stories and impressions which I feel capture the essence of my dad and of my relationship with him. Let me begin with a scene from my childhood when I was 7 years old. The story I'm about to tell you will give you an idea of my father's dedication and patience, and is just one of many experiences which helped instill in me a healthy attitude towards scientific experimentation. We lived in the Adelaide Hills at the time. It was during the 1980s when the hills experienced an infestation of black Portuguese millipedes that reached almost plague proportions. These little beasts filled people's gardens, garages, and often their homes. They were horrible, smelly creatures that made an awful crunching sound when trodden on, and just to round things off, the crunching sound was accompanied by an awful odour. Here we see an army of them getting into a house. The millipede situation had become so bad that I would often find them accompanying me in the shower. Therefore, being a curious kid, I began a series of scientific experiments. The experiment started off simple enough. For example, seeing if they could swim, which they can't. However, these experiments became progressively more complex. And soon enough, I was preparing my first scientific graphs. Here's one I whipped up one day after school. However, not satisfied with this, I became convinced that the ultimate experiment would be to see how long it would take for one of these millipedes to completely dissolve in a bottle of Johnson's baby shampoo. This bottle was the perfect receptacle for this study because it was clear plastic, and I was therefore able to track the millipede's slow but steady decomposition each day as I had my shower. By the end of week 3, the millipede had completely liquefied and the shampoo had turned to a rather disgusting thick black sludge. This is where my dad enters the story. He came out of the shower one day reporting that since his own regular shampoo had run out, he had used mine instead. He noted that it had seemed a funny colour but proceeded to use it anyway. And that now his hair had an unusual smell. He wanted to know, did I know anything about this? It must have been a truly disgusting realisation for my dad as I explained to him the slow but steady march of millipede decomposition during week 1, followed by week 2, and that he had unwittingly washed his hair with the results of week 3. I concluded my summary of events by claiming, with some truth on my side, that the whole thing had been a scientific experiment. Now, most fathers would be none too impressed to receive this sort of news, standing dripping wet in the lounge room, clutching a towel. But upon realising what had happened, and perhaps swayed by my burgeoning interest in experimentation with biological substances, Marcello happily burst out laughing. To my relief, he found it all very funny, although when he'd finished laughing, I do seem to recall him saying that if I ever wanted to try this again, I should employ some sort of proper labelling system. Thus began my career in science, which I owe in large part to my father's passion for knowledge and inquiry. I was reminded of this episode recently when my son Harry, who is almost 7 himself, had combined some sort of mess with liquids, and he actually said to me with a glint in his eye, "But Dad, it was an experiment." I kid you not. I'm grateful to my father for the many things he has taught me, for the many opportunities he has helped create for me, and for the many adventures we have been on together. He taught me to ski in Italy on a freezing cold day when I was 5 years old. This particular photo was taken a bit later at Mount Buffalo. He taught me to windsurf here in Adelaide when I was 7. That's my father on the left-hand side and myself up on the right-hand side. He also took me mountaineering in Italy for the first time when I was about 9. As you can see on this photo, the slope isn't so steep, but I felt very safe with my dad on the other end of the rope. This was the first of several alpine experiences which continued into teenage years and beyond, and which taught me a lot about the natural beauty of the world and about self-reliance. This photo here was taken on our trip to Patagonia together. On one particular day, when I was 18, I remember slouching around feeling sorry for myself, determined not to take any significant action with my life until I had it all worked out, exactly what I was going to do. I was probably walking a fine line between being intellectual and being a total cop-out. He wisely told me that while I was working it out, I should start doing something, anything. Tennis would do, I remember him saying, frustrated. This, in fact, is the one thing that he has always impressed upon me, that is to do something and to do it well. And it's an outlook that has served me very well in my life, and one that I hope to pass on to my children as well. Now, as you already know, Marcello does many things and he does them well. Many of you will have seen Marcello's art, his science, and his music. Indeed, this is where Marcello likes to sit, at the intersection of interesting things. For my own pursuits, I have tended to paint smaller, narrowly defined targets, and in this sense, I'm more conservative than he, although it seems to be common wisdom that radical parents produce such offspring just as vice versa. Having said this, Marcello's big picture outlook has nonetheless rubbed off on me and continues to be an influential factor in my life. Between them, my parents, Marcello and Daniela, planted many seeds in me as a youngster. Indeed, I think this was one of their strengths as parents, to create opportunities. Now, it's occasionally true that I wasn't always keen on these opportunities when first presented, but I never did regret them in the long run. For example, when I was 13, Dad enrolled me in an 8-week scuba diving course. When I found out there was to be a 2-hour written test at the end in order to pass, I just desperately wanted to drop out of the whole thing. But thankfully, my dad didn't let me drop out, didn't let me give up so easily. And in the end, I learned that I was happier if I did not run away from these sorts of challenges, and this was yet another valuable lesson. Here's a photo that I like very much of my mum and I up in Queensland, where I got to put those scuba diving lessons to good use. Now, my parents also granted me a lot of freedom, especially during my teenage years. Admittedly, I was not a particularly rebellious teenager, but on the other hand, with different parents, I may well have been. I still remember coming home on various occasions and telling my dad about my latest drug-induced experience, and in response, I would receive not admonishment, but a string of dissecting, inquiring questions regarding the nature of my experience. When I was 16, I asked for Aldous Huxley's essay published as a book called The Doors of Perception. He happily obliged, which is not surprising given his extremely liberal attitude towards acquisition of books. In fact, my mum can attest to the situation that we'll soon need a bunker in the sand dune to house the growing collection. Now, returning to the topic of planting seeds, in 1990, when I was 15, my dad bought, possibly somewhat by chance, this CD here by a Senegalese artist called Youssou N'Dour. I listened to this for many years and slowly my interest grew. I developed a passion for music from West Africa, and in fact 14 years later, when I was 24, I joined up with a Senegalese drummer who had migrated to live in Australia, and we played together in a band, and that was a lot of fun and very rewarding for me. And I suspect this simply would not have happened were it not for this particular CD that was planted 14 years earlier in the house, somewhat surreptitiously, just as I was beginning to play guitar. Indeed, guitar is yet another of the many seeds planted in the household when I was young, and which grew into a passion that now is very much my own. Thinking that this whole seed planting business might actually work, I have no less than 3 guitars sitting in my lounge room, perched, waiting for my 2 boys to play them. The guitar up here on the left, this one here is actually one of Marcello's first guitars. If you look inside, it has a dated 1958, I believe. The one down the bottom is a 3/4 size guitar that I bought for the boys a couple of months ago. And the one up on the right will probably be recognised by my uncle Giorgio, who I'm very glad to have with us tonight. I bought this particular guitar when I was travelling in Bolivia when I was 18, and I had this sudden withdrawal of guitar, and I went out and spent half my money on it. It was Giorgio who organised for some money to be wired up to me in Bolivia from Argentina so that I could actually return back to Argentina, where I'd been living with Giorgio at the time. I will close with a story about a big question that I asked my dad once when I was little, possibly 4 or 5 years old. I asked, where was I before I was born? His answer made a lasting impression on me, and it also succinctly summarises my father's outlook on the natural world, which is simultaneously scientific and intensely spiritual. My father's reply was that before I was born, I had been part of the sea, of the sky, of the earth, of the mountains, of the rocks, and of the sand on the very beach we were standing on at that moment. In a beautiful way, this answer is scientifically meaningful and at the same time had the desired effect of being awe-inspiring and mysterious. So on this note, I would like to conclude by saying that I'm very proud of my father, and I thank him dearly for all that he has nurtured in me, both scientific and spiritual. Thank you. And I have a little video message from one of my children.
So what are you going to do in Adelaide when you go there next time?
We can make boats and airplanes.
I really Anything else? Maybe something different this time?
Something different. Like what? Like a helicopter?
Yeah, maybe a helicopter.
What else?
What do you most like to eat when you go to Adelaide to visit your nonna?
Gnocchi and pasta.
Who doesn't like fruit?
No,
he doesn't like fruit.
Nana doesn't like fruit.
But he likes pasta.
Yes, he likes
And you like pasta. You like making the pasta with him, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you make the pasta with Nonna?
Well, we use that machine. We make the shapes so you can make them flat and
You can make it any shape you want, eh?
yeah.
In inglese?
Bye bye.
Thank you.
As you can see, we'll have cheese and coffee, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes.
I can't remember what I've done. I think... Hang on, let me see. Yeah, okay, there you go. So you just go forward. Just
So what do I do? I just press there?
Yeah, okay.
I think this is your last chance to hear from me tonight. I would like to read a message that Laurie Geffen sent for tonight for Marcello. It is difficult to brief about Marcello, who so endearing is not a brief person. We have been friends and colleagues for nearly 40 years since we met first in Melbourne in the late 1960s. Our bonds were cemented over 2 decades in Adelaide and have endured despite seldom seeing one each other these days. As others will no doubt elaborate, Marcello is a unique amalgam of a Renaissance polymath born 400 years too late, a quintessential European despite having spent most of his life under southern skies, and a passionately engaged citizen both of contemporary Italian and the world. Not many are granted the triple gift of high intellect, physical dexterity and endurance, and social grace. In Marcello, these attributes blend charmingly in a treasured friend and colleague. To Marcello and to our dear friend Daniela, we offer a warm mazel tov and heartfelt apologies for our unavoidable absence. Laurie Geffen and Hina Geffen. And this is a message sent for Jose Cabero from Sweden. Dear Marcello, Superman deserves a super celebration and a super recognition to all contributions to science and society. With warmest and fond regards, Jose Cabero. Well, this is the end of the evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce Marcello, who is going to respond and to give us some words of wisdom at the end of the evening.
Well, my very, very dear friends, family, colleagues, if there was something that I was hoping over many years, I think it's happening now. And so if I feel there is often some emotion, don't be surprised. Unfortunately, my emotions make me less brief than usual. How can I start reminiscing what happened tonight and in the rest of my life without seeing behind who is behind it all? But you'll hear more about my lovely wife and love wife more tomorrow, because she's going to speak properly tomorrow, so I want to know what she has to say about me before I respond. And of course, Ian and Judy are having great fun. I think they are the most fun-loving people that I know, and I'm very fortunate that they have decided. Not quite clear what to celebrate, because many of you thought when you received the invitation I was going to retire. Well, perhaps I get the hint, but forget it for the time being. Then eventually somebody thought that was my birthday. I'm not sure, but I don't think I was born in this day. So clearly, the motivation was purely a deep and strong friendship. And for that, I really thank you, Ian and Judy. You'll hear more about them tomorrow, because for the same token, Ian also is going to talk tomorrow about our lives together. But you heard something from my brother. And if you think of anybody, that was before I was born, so we're still quite happy. Now, you realize that the bonds between brothers is something that can be very strong or very weak. You realize it's very strong. I was very touched by his words. But I will reminisce something, because I didn't know what he was saying, showing, and so it will be a bit of repetition. I will move very quickly. But before I get onto that, I must say that the thing that encapsulates better what my life has been is what Bill alluded. The divide. Now, Bill said, well, I'm not quite an Australian and I long to be a European. Well, the good news is that you're right. The bad news is that you're still wrong, because we like to argue a lot, as you realize, because I am torn not between two worlds, but three. Between three continents, South America, Europe, and Australia, and also between three languages. And it's not the physical distance that is the tyranny. The tyranny is the language. And I know too well, because my English was very limited when I first came. I couldn't understand a word of Graham Campbell. I barely understand it now. I began to write what Bill thought was good English. I didn't realize that. And I'm sorry to say that my English is not improving according to my best friends. And I can assure you that my Italian is not improving either. And my brother reminds me my Spanish could do a bit of a brush up. So I'm in real trouble. So before all finishes in a life, my dream has been to reconcile these three worlds of space and time. And as you realize a little bit of my history, I left many places forever. I left first Italy to go to South America, and I thought it was the end of it. Then I left Argentina when I was 20 forever. And then I left again Italy forever for Australia. So I'm a person that feels that I left behind a lot of things in search of roots. Now, tonight is the first time that I feel those roots are coming together. I thank you, all of you, for having had the courage to endure this evening, and hopefully some of you may still be here tomorrow. We know who we should expect tomorrow, by the way. Some of you cannot make it, but we'll look a good eye. We have a good look at you if you are still here. But hopefully you'll share what I certainly failed tonight, that some of these different lines of existence are coming together. And tonight we heard enough about not just adventures in mountains and the sea, but a little bit of culture and a little bit of science. Tomorrow will be more of science and more of culture, but they are intertwined, and I'd like to think that this is my ideal way of existing, and has been a dream of my life to be able to bring people together that I feel very close, like all of you are, in different ways, and thinking that I can be in the same room for once. And I'd like to think that this doesn't make a bad company. In fact, I'm enjoying all of this. So going back to my little story, well, you've seen the picture of Nonno Giulio, but you see here his face over there, and you see here our father, Dalmiro, when they were back in probably in Italy, early 1900s. So because my father was quite old when he married a younger wife, our family really spans now. It's frightening to see. Just in 2 generations, 3 centuries. Our father was born at the end of 1800s, and we are still here, Giorgio and I, after this long time. Our father was a handsome man. He was in the First World War as a soldier, was so shocked by what he saw that certainly he became very anti-militaristic, and certainly a distance in time. He shared that with us, even though I really cannot say I never met him. He was very good, and he chose a wonderful, much younger woman. You can see our mother. You can see straight away a very lovely woman, a very lovely Giorgio smiling. He has been smiling all his life, and you can see I was already looking for something else. And thus, looking back at my own pictures is a problem. I was a difficult kid. I was sulky, I was grumpy, or I was simply serious. Who knows? But we were brought up in the mountains in Sauze, in the Alps near Turin. Our house was probably the only one outside of the old village, and so was prominent in some early postcard of Sauze Dulce. That's our house there, the one that our father built, not for me, but for Giorgio, because he was concerned that Giorgio wasn't growing fast enough and strong enough. But we have this attachment to this mountain forever. You can see here the young fellows. Giorgio was one of them, skiing in the middle of the still deserted forests. The Sauze, this little town, it was and still is pretty primitive, but when we enjoyed, we were actually guests very often during summers and winters of locals that were looking after us. And I still remember that we indeed slept in a room like the one on the top right, with animals and listening to the sound and the smell of animals. So that's well embedded in our psychic. Now, my brother George on the top left there is seriously trying to teach me skiing, and he was quite serious as well, but I was even more serious, as I realized. I was quite pig-headed, if there was any doubt at all that you may have it. Now, something happened then, at the time. I was actually, I hope I didn't forget one picture. One picture dropped out. It's a bit of a shame because it's almost like a little, I changed some pictures to save time earlier. There was a picture of, but I'll tell you the story, it's very touching and it's very telling about our family. We knew nothing. In 1943, the Jews were of course persecuted. We only realized a few years ago that a colleague, friend, companion in work of our father was a Jew. Just a moment, yeah. And he undertook to save the family, partially by hiding the father, his companion, in his office. He was taken anyway by the Germans and disappeared in the concentration camp. But he sent his daughter to stay with us in the mountains. And so we had this 13, 14 years old girl that was officially our child keeper. And I have a wonderful picture, which it's not here now. But the wonderful thing is that from there, in that picture, you see her and George and I, me always very serious, a beautiful girl, and looking at back a mountain. That mountain always represented for me the memory of those times. And this mountain is shown here on the top left. And you can see that only about last year I finally managed to go to the top of the mountain. It's not a tall mountain, but to me it represented the return to see how the world of South Aduls on the top right there looked like from that mountain. I always dream, and that's probably the reason why I'm going to peaks. Not for any altitude, but because I want to see what is behind, how things look from the other side. And so that's part of my life. But most exciting, Giorgio managed to trace this girl over the years. We lost track of her. And I was the first one to meet her about a year ago. And here she is. On the top left is her when she was 14 with us in the mountain. And she's the only survivor of her family. And she's a very active Jewish activist, a wonderful lady. And here she is with me last year. So this is a little story of what our family was for in the difficult times during the war, not very far away from the time that our beloved father lost his natural son, Guy. The house is still there. We went back just with our grandchildren recently. Now, our parents after the Second World War tried to make me probably from a serious person, at least take it seriously. So I took it very seriously. I was sent to a Jesuit school. You can see they are very serious indeed. I was so serious in religion that I eventually abandoned it. And the big change in 49, Giorgio said, our family, now with our lovely second father, migrated to Argentina, 1949, by ship, traditional migrants. I thought that was the end of my life in Italy. The teenagers' times, Giorgio spoke about it. I won't mention because no one remembers really who one was in the teenage times. And I got wonderful memory. He is in the mid-teenagers with our Augusto, Verbena, our mother, Giorgio. But Giorgio mentioned this already. I'll go quickly through because Giorgio mentioned already. In 1960, I was determined before going to Italy to see a bit of South America, and so I decided to spend 3 or 4 months traveling. And Giorgio, I was lucky enough to accompany me. Here is, we are at the edge of a Peruvian jungle after going to some mountains. We travel in very obscure places. We trade things with local Indians. Close to the people were actually chopping heads, but these were peaceful Indians. My love for the mountains was certainly well through there, and you can see I was going by myself very often up on some mountains. We travel in many ways, you see, by not quite buses, by little boats. You saw the picture in the middle arriving from Peru to Brazil. At the bottom you see Giorgio there, a young Giorgio we traveled with some Franciscans. It's not clear whether Giorgio became a more saint himself or whether poor Franciscan was shocked by meeting us and encountering that we didn't think that he would be surviving very well in the jungle, thinking about Franciscan views. We visited terrible places up in Peru and in the middle, and there we are enjoying the 3 months descent from the Amazon. That was a wonderful time with Giorgio, and I owe him many things, but I learned the difference between him and I. We both were, at the time, I was 20, Giorgio was 24. Naturally enough, we were chasing girls. But my God, he was far more successful than I was. Back to Torino, 1960. Torino, you can see the mountains, the Alps there. I left a lot of friends I thought forever. There is a high school in Buenos Aires. You can see there a young Marcello. You see other three companions. Well, it took a long time, even after Australia. Only in 2006 we sailed together. We didn't see each other for many, many decades. So life is a circle, and I'm pleased to say that a couple of them should have been here, would have been here, but they couldn't at last minute. This shows that life, it can actually go back not one continent, but perhaps 3. Back in Italy, we spent time also with the parents of our second father, in the middle there, and on the right you see the first lovely wife of Giorgio, Anna Maria, who died tragically in the 1970s. And there you see one daughter, a lovely niece. She's still in Milano. In fact, Anna Maria and Giorgio had 2 wonderful children, Guy and Giuliana. You hear more about them. And then after his wife died in the late 70s, early 80s, he remarried again to an equally gorgeous Brazilian woman. He was living in Brazil at the time. They live in Buenos Aires, and here is Angelica, and daughter Marianna, that actually if you think that they are, Giorgio speaks pretty well English, probably better than mine, their family is actually incredible. Giorgio speaks Italian with Marianna. Marianna speaks Spanish with Angelica. She was born in Argentina. Angelica speaks Portuguese or Brazilian with Giorgio. This is all in the same conversation. Giorgio and I spend, after those times, a lot of time together, but every so often. And you can still see Giorgio smiles, and I'm still the same grumpy boy. And in Torino, you heard my colleagues in Torino in 1960. I encountered a professor there, a pretty stern professor, Filogamo, in anatomy. And it's because of him that I'm in Australia, in a good way, in a way, because he made life so hard for me that eventually I decided to abandon. He was a pupil of Levi, and of course 3 other pupils of Levi, that's why he was probably a bit grumpy too. 3 pupils of Levi left Italy much earlier, in the late 30s and mid-40s, and all 3 got Nobel Prizes. So that common professor was actually a real teacher. Rita Levi Montalcini, Salvador Luria, and Renato Dulbecco, those of you that work on the Dulbecco medium. They all came from Torino, and of course Torino was very good in creating something and then allowing people to leave. So I was an exception, and Giorgio Gabella, my supervisor, also left Italy at the same time, and he went to England, where he lives now. You heard about my adventures in politics. Mixture, I tried to change the world, as everybody tried at the time, and you heard that I was involved in the sexual revolution. My colleagues thought I was a revolutionary. When they turned really revolutionary with arms, I abandoned them, and they abandoned me because there was a clear misunderstanding. I never meant using arms. I meant a revolution in different ways. And that took me to Australia, to zoology in 1970. Jeff Bernstein was a young professor. I met him, and he, in fact, told me, well, do you want to come to work with me? I said, yes. Or I said, I want to come to work with you for a while. I met him in Venice. A few months later, he sent me a telegram. No faxes existed at the time, no email. And a telegram invited me for 18 months with a grant to Melbourne. So I went to Daniela, was my girlfriend at the time. We had vague ideas of getting married, but I wasn't sure. So I said, well, do you want to marry me and go to Australia? Well, here we are. First thing I arrived to Melbourne, I found a pretty hard larrikin, typical Australian. John Furness, you see, you wouldn't recognize him. He's still here. He lost his beard, hasn't lost his intellectual touch. I owe to John, and hear more about it, those of you who are interested in science, of course, tomorrow, about the adventures together in science, and Dean, of course. I learned from them a great deal about Australia, a great deal about English, and it's because of John that learned English, certainly not of you, Graham Campbell. John challenged me the very same afternoon I arrived, morning. Jeff took me from the airport to the department, and John was very meticulous. He read every single paper in Brazilian and in Italian, so he learned that I discovered some cells, or claimed I discovered some cells. He said, no, I don't believe you. I said, yes, they're there. I don't believe you. Okay, we did the experiment. And I tell all my friends now, I tell you too, that I was right. They are still there. It's not clear whether I was right very often after that, but at least I got the first right. That was a big department in zoology. You've seen some picture of that. You've seen some pictures of Graham Campbell there, trying to mimic either Lewis Smith, who is here tonight, one of our early postdocs, a very powerful mind in electron microscopy. She is a real microscopist, by the way, which I never was. And you see here with Daniela, indeed, in one of those asados. And may I say, Graham, that everything you said about me was so close to the truth, although you make it very fun, that it's actually very eerie to hear that, including the feeling that when you show the carabinieri, well, I was a carabinieri in Italy. I was conscripted by obligation, but I served in the carabinieri. Well, then, of course, in the early times, you heard something from this quite exciting intellect, very powerful personality, Elspeth. You heard her before, and of course we share here and there moments in science, and you heard a lot about her, and I really cherish also her influence in me, showing that you can be young and aggressive and still be absolutely pleasant. And that's something that Australians have developed to a maximum. They're transparent, they can be indeed arrogant and aggressive, but never unpleasant. Now, this brings me back to a common friendship that goes much further back than I realized. This is 1973. After Melbourne, there was a meeting in Banff in Canada. You can see there a young Alan North. And you can see also there a young David Hurst, who is here too. Thank you, David, for coming, and Christine for joining us. Now, I didn't realize until I went through my slide that we were there at the same time. It was a wonderful event, one of the first events probably of the entire nervous system, so to speak. There is us in the sun and enjoying the wilderness. We met again in the same place many years later. You can see here on the to celebrate the life of the wonderful lady, and we had many times together. We were guests indeed in Oregon. You have Alan, who for mysterious reason chose me to be his best man, marrying this wonderful wife, Anne-Marie. They came all the way from there to marry in Melbourne, and I was his best man. I had no clue what being best man was, so he took me by hand, and I was eventually doing a reasonable job. Certainly did such a good job, they're still married now, plus they have children. So I feel very proud of it. At the time, we enjoyed in the mountains, so I was absolutely fascinated to see your pictures, because we have different pictures, but the same feeling of experience. We spent time in the forest. There is from our block that Daniela was in at the time. Andrea was in South America by himself with Giorgio. And so we saw this mountain, and we dreamed to be on the top for similar reasons. By the way, you may have realized from this picture, Alan has been to real mountain in the very 7,000 meters. And you may not see him, but he lost one foot. So I say this because he lost one foot like he can lose a nail. So he's a tough guy. And so I rely on the fact that I could go with him up the mountains. And here is a picture, the very picture you saw before, put in the tent. And you can see here the first light. He was trying to take the very picture that he actually showed us before. And this shows indeed the marriage in Melbourne. You can see here common friends. It was a very fantastic reunion. He felt close to a lot more Australian than anywhere else in the world. I was quite fascinated. You can see here, on the top right, you can see again David Hurst. And so this is our experience with a wonderful person. What about Barbara? You heard Barbara. Barbara is an incredible, quiet woman, a real quiet achiever. He has done enormous amount of different things. She comes from a very distinguished family in politics and social cultures in Victoria. And in fact, one of the clerks was in the 1800s a very important person. I keep forgetting exactly who he was, but the family shows all the tradition, and we learn the depth of Australia through her. She has been very close to us, so close that you sort of held our first son in the very Man Macedon in Melbourne very few weeks after he was born. So you follow us from very, very close, and we still feel very close despite the fact that you don't live close to us. And I think that your words tonight were really very sweet and very deep, and so thank you for coming all the way to see us again. Quickly, we moved from Melbourne to Adelaide in 1975. I joined with John Lavoisier, a new endeavour, a new medical school. Some of you are here that are from the school indeed. That was a magic time. Two young fellows in two separate departments. Our mentors, which you'll meet in a second, were wise enough to put us into different departments, a bit like with Bill Besting, because we were good friends, but we also argued all the time, and they didn't want to have too many troubles. And that indeed kept us working for 17 years together. My mentor really that brought me to Adelaide was Laurie Geffen. We heard the wonderful word of Laurie and Hina. They were really our friends, and he was one of the forces of setting up Flinders in a scientific way in medical research. He was our first professor of physiology. Naturally, the second mentor is John Chalmers, factotum, professor of medicine, foundation professor. He is on the right. You'll hear more about him tomorrow because he also will speak, and I want to respond properly to him because he's a dear friend, but my gosh, you don't want him to get on the wrong side. in a nice way. I think he has been the most tremendous positive influence, and we miss you when you abandoned Flinders. May I say that it was a big, big hole you left behind. And of course, in the mid-80s, young Ian and Judy joined our lab. And since then, of course, they made a life, and you hear more about them, as I said, tomorrow. But the environment was fantastic. In the late 80s, early 90s, a little bit of revolution happened in my life, because while John von Ness moved to Melbourne, I acquired a much younger friend, younger in age, but not in maturity and in science. He looked a bit lost there, but I can assure there's nothing lost about Simon Brooks. Simon and Helen are here. They arrived, indeed, like I arrived to Australia, like young migrants working as a postdoc. And I'm pleased to say that he has taken, of course, now the steps of the Department of Physiology very well. And the Centre of Neuroscience, we were serious people. You can see here John, you can see our leader, Simon Brooks, singing. Now, in all this, nothing changed. I'm still the old grumpy guy on the right, very serious, looking like a young kid. And then finally arrived another person earlier than I can think of, Bill Blessing. Now, Bill Blessing is a picture that is a long time ago, but it looks still remarkably like you now. On the right is us going to incredible, strange places, crossing places with his car, which is still the same car, the same brand. He will die with his car. And of course, we were going in strange places where we had to hitchhike back, as indeed you heard about. It's true. We hitchhiked back from many, many places in South Australia. Probably we did more kilometers hitchhiking from our adventures in windsurfing than in the car itself. This is our families still when we live in the hills. You can see there Sue, who's here with us too, and the first of the two daughters. And then we spend a lot of times camping together at the Coorons. And there's a little art piece here, a wonderful piece of art that we have. It's a present from Sue. She, in the old ages, our women, because I'm talking about my wife and of course about Judy, seem to become true artists. And I really encourage all of you to accept the fact that they are better than we are. And I say that without any hesitation. With Bill, we share a lot of windsurfing. Why not? In the Coorons. That mention that Bill mentioned about us being very heavy in 30 knots, that's it. The first attempt to cross the Coorons is about 120 kilometers north and south. Because we failed the first time, we eventually succeeded. Crossing from Kangaroo Island, here is on the top left, and in the quietness of the Coorong, we spend many, many days there. It's a wonderful feeling of the wilderness in a peaceful way. And we managed to carry a lot of other people with us. You can see there eventually even Ian Gibbins came with us. And of course we thought we would teach him windsurfing. And of course Ian Gibbins is a master windsurfer now. He does really 360 degrees over the waves, while Bill and I will look outside and say, no, it's a bit too strong for us today. We are still a bit daredevils. Indeed, that was just before we crossed the Gulf the first time. First trying to cross the Lake Eyre. Thank God the next day the water disappeared, so we couldn't do it, otherwise we'd be stranded there forever. But the biggest achievement, and we're very proud of it, of Bill, is when he published his wonderful book. We were really just the four of us, and it was a wonderful feeling. I think Bill has achieved his maturity then, and everybody thought, well, that's it. Well, you're wrong. Bill is still maturing scientifically and is doing his best science in this very time. So I'm very privileged to be his friends despite of our huge arguments. I was Catholic when I was a child and abandoned it. Bill, I never knew exactly, but he feels, probably I feel that he's more religious than ever, so our mutual incompatibility is increasing, and whether we'll meet in hell or in heaven, time will tell. But Bill loves dearly his land. He's a true Aussie, a true Australian. He comes from the land, and he's returning to the land, and he's, with his wife, they are living more often in this barren place in the hills of Adelaide, where we expect something to happen. It's almost like the end of the universe. And it's almost what my friend Aldo Fasolo was thinking that I was dreaming, to retire in the obscure place in Australia to survive the rest of the world. I feel Bill is doing that, and I'd like to think that I'll still be friends when you do it, and I will join you. Of course, we were lucky at Flinders because we had a continuity. Our second professor of physiology is here now, is Terry Nicholas, with Patricia, his companion. Terry is a remarkable person, and as our good secretary Karen here remembers a few years ago, when I was in one of my expeditions in Patagonia, incommunicado for a few months, Terry was also crossing some oceans with his boat, incommunicado. So we were completely, the department was completely headless in a way, probably just as well, because she learned to run the department pretty well by herself, as Simon Brooks has discovered now. So we owe her a lot. Simon took over. Physiology is thriving and it's wonderful, and my young, I call him one of my young mentors, a bit like Ian and Judy. He is doing very well, quite independent, and I feel they are increasingly on the side. It's like being a guest in my old home, and it's a nice feeling, I can tell you. Well, Karen, our secretary, is here. Thank you for coming. And as I said before, you lasted 2 or 3 professors, and I'd like to think you'll still be here with us for a long time. I owe you so much that if you were to decide to leave, I'd probably truly retire. So you have me on your hands, Karen. Friends, quickly, friends who are here tonight because they cannot come tomorrow night, I forgive you for once. My dear friends that live next to us for a long time. Here are the Woodgates and Erica. And the artists, if you ever come to our place at the beach, you see a round house there. Everybody thinks it's a funny house. It's a beautiful house. And it came from the imagination of Erica, who cannot be here tonight. This is a time where next to us we're building our home. You can see us trying to do some mountaineering in our own building home, my son and I, in the absence of true mountains in Adelaide. And that's when you left Adelaide forever to go to Tasmania. So we'll miss you. I cannot not recall, of course, our strong friendship with the Berries. Beverly is with us here. Mark, as you know, is no longer with us. But remarkable things is that we were very close towards the end, all our life, but certainly towards the end. And this picture has been taken really only about 2 or 3 days before Michael left us. He died peacefully, and so it's a strong memory because he was a difficult guy. I still remember he attacked me the first year I was teaching anatomy, insisting on teaching anatomy while I was in physiology, and he said, well, who are you to say so that this is such and such? And so I went to the book and said, such and such is in the book, and I was saying what the book says, so you're wrong. He was taken aback and we became friends since. So I discovered that taking a harsh line on people sometimes can pay off, particularly if they are of great value. And so I still take this, of course, I fail many times, and I apologize if I fail too often. But there are plenty of reasons to smile. Here came Andrea, you saw him. Andrea took very quickly windsurfing. How could not he? We gave him as a present a little windsurfer. I was windsurfing, I put him on the windsurf, so it was very hard for him to refuse. But he went further. He became indeed very good. So good that when we participated to a World Championships, he became the under-18 fifth in the world, which is not an easy task. But that was not enough for him, and so he went to do he did other things, of course. He attempted to do some sailing as a crew. He didn't like that. He didn't like bosses telling him. He took that on from his father, possibly. He took on my guitar, and very quickly realized that the very classic guitar or Spanish guitar was a bit too little for him, so he went on the proper, really hardcore guitar. And he took me with his little group into places where he was playing in pubs that he was not allowed to enter alone. He was 13, 14, so I had to go with him in pubs listening to this very, very loud music. And I learned a hell of a lot about this modern music, and I'm probably one of the few here that can understand the depth of Metallica. I know everything about Metallica. I took him back to our roots. How true was indeed, Graham, your picture were true. Some of our family, these are our close family, close cousins near Italy. They have no idea where Australia is. They think Australia is just around the corner of Rome. They don't even know where Rome is. They live in a very peaceful countryside, beautiful. That's how they live still now. Andrea and Daniela, you heard a lot about them, and they're good friends. And Andrea, of course, took the mountains. Again, how could he not? I took him when he was very young. He learned to ski better than I do, and he started to climb. Climbing is a concern for parents, and you know why. But he came, him and Giorgio's son, Guy, they went to climb in Patagonia ahead of our expedition. Here you can see them up in very difficult mountain, really difficult mountain. This is at the top of the mountain. They're asking me whether I did climb. I said, no, I didn't, but our sons did. And then when we convinced them that those vertical things were a bit too much for us back in 1995, us with my brother and I and the head of expedition, then we entered in the wild area that I explored many years earlier. In fact, back in 1959, in this desolate area, we went around the mountain, Cerro Pyramid, looks like a pyramid. That's Marcello going for 4 months in the wilderness in 1959. I was 19. Well, in the same age, Andrea came with us in a similar expedition. This time, this is the mountain from below. And eventually, with the 4 of us, plus our head of expedition, we went to the top of that mountain about 36 years later. Wonderful adventure. There was a big emotional time. We didn't realize at the time that Daniela was waiting home, poor Daniela, thinking that all the male family of the Costas could have been wiped out by an avalanche. But we survived, and we're still here, back with friends. The expedition in '59, you can see there, the expedition of 1995 with Giorgio, same 1995, and we returned then in 2005. And as you see, Giorgio is very wisely thinking that might be time to give up. But my love for those Patagonian ice fields, look here from the satellite, is just something for me hard to forget, because they're still very desolated places, very uncharted lands. Back in 1959, one wash-up picture in black and white because it was all wet, and back in 2005 in the same area with Giorgio. I kept climbing very often by myself here in the trip up in Peru. When I wasn't sure whether I could take a picture of myself, I took a picture of my hat. And I had a few adventures there, and I loved this mountain about 5,500 meters. Back in Europe, I became a quasi-instructor, then I abandoned it, but I managed to go up to Matterhorn. Actually, we call it Cervino, of course, which is the correct name. The Swiss persist in calling Matterhorn. The Gran Paradiso. Also, when I was in conferences, you recognize Mount Fuji, easy mountain, but fascinating to see all the people going up. And Gran Sasso, the tallest mountain in the Apennine, and eventually I decided to go to Mont Blanc, and in 1978. We'll see whether this will work. It might not work, but it doesn't matter. I knew that wasn't going to work. Oh yes, it does work. A night, early morning, 30 degrees below zero, through a normal path. By the way, only a few days ago, a few people died here. It's a tragedy, but that's about 35 degrees zero, about 7 o'clock in the morning. By the time I arrived at the top, I was blind because the cold froze my cornea, and my help, my person that was with me, fundamentally took me back. By myself, I wouldn't never come back. This is the tallest mountain in Europe, of course, and that was my probably hardest adventure in this sense. But of course, going back to my son, here is when he got his doctorate degree. Typical, very somber, very typical, anyway, thank him. And I just got a glimpse of him, a bit surprised there on the left, bottom left, and then his natural smile, unlike me, that actually opens my heart all the time. And of course, he has been a very good companion of us, and he could not do anything better than being chosen by his lovely wife. I'm sure he was chosen, and I think he chose her, and Kat, you heard before, cannot be here. She's minding our 2.5 grandchildren. And here is the family, entire family now in Melbourne, very happy family. Going back in time, of course, this is the 2 cousins. You can see Giorgio's son, like his father, was smiling, and thank you, Andrea, for being different than me, because you are smiling unlike me. But he had a lot of time spent with Guy. Guy was a superb photographer when he was alive, and of course he heard that he died in the mountains. What happened to the old guys? Well, you heard before. Here's George and I, without any food, almost at the top of a terrible storm after many hours of walking, thinking that perhaps it's time to change into some more sedentary activity. So here we are back in the mountains where we grew up in the Sauce with Andrea and with the rest of the family. I won't show you all the picture, but it was a fantastic reunion. And fortunately, our grandchildren, this our, on the left, Harino in Melbourne, and or in Orlando, in the middle, Michele, the son of Giuliano, the grandson of Giorgio. They're all making faces, but they're all smiling. Even more emotional to have a picture of us. Here's Giorgio, and here's me, and our grandmother in the house of South adults, and we were there just a few weeks ago, with our two grandchildren, Daniela, on the very same balcony of our house, the Costa Villa of 1936. You saw this picture before of Marcello looking up, serious, and you can see Marcello still looking up, equally serious. But I have plenty of reasons to smile. Plenty of reasons, despite of the sadness, because the smile is there of Guy. Guy was a superb photographer. This is his picture. They make me smile all the time. The memory of him makes me smile. And what makes me more smile than anything else is to be able to share with you all these experiences and to have had the fortune to attract you to this evening. And I hope it has not been too heavy. And I hope that this represents a little bit of a window, not just on me, on a person, but it's like a mirror. We all are a mirror of each other. And I'd like to think that you have learned something about your own lives, because certainly I learned a lot about mine. So thank you very much, and I look forward to see some of you tomorrow. Thank you.
There's more tomorrow. It has been a very moving evening for me, and I hope that in some way it has been for you too. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you again tomorrow, and we'll continue with more of these explorations until tomorrow. Good night.